Chapter 1. In the belly of the salvage freighter, day and night blurred into a dim, scratchy grey lit by the roomy blinks of a failing overhead panel. The hum of life support was the closest thing to music, toneless, constant, a muffle on every conversation. There were 4 of them on shift, though their names had grown slurred with fatigue and overfamiliarity. What defined them now was posture. One slumped over a console, mouth ajar and eyes heavy-lidded, fingers twitching just enough to flick through the monotony of long-range scans. Another huddled on a crate, boots wedged against the deck plating, gloved hands steepled over a mess of ration wrappers. No one bothered with full uniform this far out. The ship itself was too battered, too cold, too indifferent for regulations. The far end of the operations bay, a woman with the bony hands of a pickpocket flicked toggles on the main board, pausing occasionally to thump it with the heel of her fist. Her partner leaned over her shoulder, chewing at the skin around his thumbnail. They didn't speak, but their body language, tight, spidery, a careful division of space, said more than the usual shift banter ever could. Nothing happened for long stretches, except the occasional cough or the hiss of hot caffeine dispensed into a polymer mug. It had been 16 hours since the last debris field. The boredom grew viscous, crawling up from the floor and settling in their necks. Even the blip of a dead satellite would have passed for excitement, but the universe beyond the viewport was empty as a drained bloodstream. They had a week's worth of nothing left before the next contract, which meant rationing more than just the food. Power, oxygen, optimism. Each was another resource to be eked out, then privately mourned. Elias Chen, diver to the crew, for the way he surfaced from his own thoughts, emerged from the head. He stood for a moment in the corridor, blinking, letting the red pink of recycled air bite his lungs. He wore the same faded flight suit as everyone else, patched along the seams and cinched with a belt 2 sizes too large. A shock of white hair stuck out from under his cap, giving him the look of a tired stage magician. He carried a battered multi-scanner in one hand, thumbing the power switch as he watched the others. "Anything," he said, voice sanded down by sleep and static. No one answered, so he drifted over to the nearest console, setting the scanner down with a thunk. He prodded at the screen, squinting at the lurching lines of telemetry. A moment later, he grunted and sat down, chair scraping the deck in protest. Another 5 minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the tap of gloved fingers or the scrape of ceramic against polymer. The woman at the main board finally let out a noise, half sigh, half growl. "It's all ice," she said. "Nothing but planetary detritus and dead signals." Elias didn't look up. "Run the deep band again." "Already did, twice." "Run it for me." The woman flicked her gaze at him, then shrugged. She punched in the commands with the heel of her hand, the way you kick a vending machine when it eats your credit. The console's fan whined, the screen resorting lines of blue, red, and green. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, a single dot pinged onto the display, right at the edge of their effective range. At first, no one reacted. These were people accustomed to false positives, a fleeting echo, a ghost in the bandwidth. But the dot didn't vanish. It lingered, gaining definition, bleeding out little tributaries of data. The woman peered at it, jaw working. "What the hell?" she muttered, then louder. "Diver, you seeing this?" Elias glanced over. He dragged the scanner closer, set it to passive mode, and waited for the handshake. The dot resolved into a set of numbers and codes. Mass, vector, albedo, pressure gradient. The mass reading scrolled out and stopped, blinking. Elias blinked, then reset the scan. The number stayed the same. He exhaled, sharp and quick. "That can't be right," he said. "Run a parallax crosscheck." The man with the thumbnail problem moved to another terminal and began typing. The blue glow of the screens gave his skin a sallow, bruised look. "Still there," the man said, "and getting bigger if I'm reading this right." No one spoke for several seconds. The hum of the ship grew louder, as if the air itself tensed. Elias chewed the inside of his cheek. "Bring it up on the view screen." The room's main display flickered, then stabilized. What showed was a patch of black, studded with the usual bone-white specks. For a moment it looked like the system had failed, just darkness, with no object to be seen. The woman adjusted the gain, and the black gave way to a silvery sliver, almost lost against the void. Then the camera's autofocus snapped in. The sliver became a line, then a hull, then the full, impossible outline of a ship. Not just any ship. Even through grain and low-res distortion, it was clear. A vessel out of time, all curves and symmetry, a behemoth built not for the cold economy of space, but for the vanity of oceans. Even the paint, white above, midnight blue below, gleamed, as if waiting for flashbulbs and fanfare. For a long minute, nobody said a word. They just stared. The first to break was the man with the thumbnail problem. Is that a cruise ship? The woman at the main board leaned in, eyes wide and wet. No, not possible. Those are Earth registry numbers on the hull. Elias reached out, steadying himself against the console as if the vision could tip him over. Somebody tell me I'm dreaming. It's not a relay artifact, the woman said. She punched up the scanner output, letting it cascade down the secondary display. It's solid. Mass is off the charts. M signature. Christ, there's a thermal reading. The man let out a breathless laugh. It's just floating out there, in the middle of nowhere. The three of them crowded closer to the screen, all pretense of shift order forgotten. The object, no, the ship, drifted with a glacial, perfect calm. Bow pointed toward nothing in particular, massive stacks rising out of the superstructure like gold teeth. The camera lens compensated for starlight, revealing tiny points of reflected color along the portholes. The woman pressed a fist to her mouth, her knuckles draining white. That's a full-sized ocean liner. Out here, it shouldn't even. Elias cut in, voice ragged. Bring us in for a better look. No one questioned him. The man with the thumbnail problem set the autopilot, adjusting course with a series of terse, practiced movements. The freighter's attitude jets burped, nudging them gently toward the impossible. Their speed dropped, momentum bleeding off into the void. As they approached, the camera picked up finer details. The hull looked pristine, untouched by the micrometeorite acne that marred most deep space derelicts. Rows of empty balconies lined the superstructure. The windows, where visible, were dark but intact. At the aft, a name in perfect gold leaf shimmered on the hull. SS Orpheus. The woman said the name aloud, as if it would break the spell. Orpheus, she whispered. That ship vanished 200 years ago. Elias gripped the edge of the console. His hands trembled slightly, but he grinned, the manic curve of his mouth visible even in the half-light. Congratulations, he said. We just found the ghost ship. The man with the thumbnail problem laughed again, louder, a nervous stutter. Yeah, or maybe it found us. The last sound was the snap of someone's glove tightening, as if bracing for impact. The crew, united by their fatigue and now by their shared hallucination, stood transfixed. Out in the black, the Orpheus drifted, oblivious to the attention. Its windows stared back, cold, mirrored, hungry. The silence broke with a chorus of overlapping commands and jittering fingers on cracked keyboards. The operations bay, already tight, grew tighter with the sudden convergence of bodies around the data terminal. Every available screen filled with registry logs, spectral analyses, insurance records decades out of date, and grainy images of ships that had never left Earth's atmosphere. No one trusted the initial scan, but no one could look away. The woman with the bony hands, who went by Ash on shift but answered to nothing off, switched her console to the old Terran maritime registries. She scrolled through the list, eyes scanning columns with a predator's efficiency, then paused. Here, she said, stabbing at the entry. The screen displayed a ship's manifest from centuries before. SS Orpheus, launched in 2122, operated by Poseidon Lines, luxury class, 12 decks, vanished with all hands during its transatlantic maiden cruise. The registry included a crisp press photo, the ship's bow cutting through stylized waves, the same lines and superstructure they saw now, hanging in the empty black. Ash glanced at the others. She looked unsteady, as if the world had slipped a half step beneath her feet. It's a match, said the man with the thumbnail habit, whose name, Jace, was stitched in peeling letters on his collar. Everything, the hull, the stacks, the markings. It's a match, Ash. It can't be, Ash said, voice barely a whisper. She paged through the attached data, each new line making less sense than the last. This thing went down in the Atlantic. There was a search. No wreckage ever found. Jace hovered close, not quite reading over her shoulder, but in her orbit. Maybe it got pulled out here by a gravity well, he offered, the way you offer a joke at a wake. Shut up, said Ash, but with no heat. Elias leaned over the comm panel, hand braced against the bulkhead. He stared at the side-by-side images, old photo and real-time feed, as if willing them to diverge. Someone's playing a trick, he said, but his voice held no conviction. Ping her again, Jay said. See if she's transmitting. Ash toggled the hailing frequency, letting the ship's automated handshake cycle through every known protocol. The screen flickered as it scanned the spectrum. No pings, no handshake, just the fat silence of an object that did not belong. Nothing, she said. But she hesitated, then reran the scan. A thin line of code flickered on the bottom edge of the display, just long enough to read. Ambient internal pressure, 1.1 atm. Atmospheric temp, 22.2 C. Jace whistled. That's cabin climate. It's running. Ash's hands trembled at the keys. No, that's not possible. Try a thermal sweep, Elias said. The screen spat out a false-color schematic, overlaying data on the drifting liner. The ship pulsed with patches of warmth along the decks, especially near the fore, where a normal bridge would sit. Heat signatures, Ash said, voice climbing a notch. It's warm, and Christ, it's cycling. Jace swiveled, grabbed a second headset, and patched into the auxiliary feed. He called up the external cameras, panning along the hull. At this distance, the bow of the Orpheus dominated the view, its flared decks pristine, the golden band of its registry gleaming beneath a dusting of micro-impacts. Jace squinted, then zoomed. Look, he said, pointing at the screen. They saw it. Along the promenade, the running lights blinked, faint but clear. Red, then blue, then white, as if the liner was waiting at dock, all ready for a grand departure. That's not ghost power, Elias said, voice like sandpaper. That's a live grid. No way, Ash muttered. No way any ship like that could keep its reactor running 2 centuries without maintenance. Maybe it's not running at all, Jace said. Maybe it never stopped. No one laughed. The room's temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, despite the sweat forming on Elias' brow. A minute passed, then another, broken only by the mechanical burble of the coffee dispenser in the corner. From somewhere aft, a voice echoed through the bulkhead. What's the status? It was the captain, Alvarez, but on the line, always Skipper, calling from her closet-sized quarters. Ash thumbed the comm switch. We have a confirmed contact. Civilian liner, Earth origin. A brief silence then. What type? Ash hesitated, looking to Elias, who just nodded. SS Orpheus. The registry is 100% match. It's intact, Skipper. No distress beacon, heat and light signatures all over the decks. A low whistle on the other end. Say again. Elias cut in. You heard her, it's Orpheus, it's floating, and it's alive. A metallic thunk through the comm, Alvarez setting her mug down maybe. Copy, put me on bridge cam. Ash patched her in, the old captain's face appearing in miniature at the corner of the screen. She wore the same brown flight suit as the rest, hair slicked back, eyes sharp despite the hour. She watched the video feed in silence. Bring us to half-click, Alvarez said. No closer, not until we have more intel. Elias opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. Instead, he stood and started collecting his own scanner, fingers drumming on the battered housing. Jace and Ash exchanged a look. Tension, hunger, maybe fear. Ash spoke first, lowering her voice. We could be rich, Diver. If even half the ship's fixtures are salvageable, the alloys, the art, the black box. Jace finished her thought. Not to mention the tech. If something's kept her running out here, it's not 22nd century hardware. Oh, Elias said. Maybe it's something we don't want to meet up close. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jace grinned, thin and crooked. Last week you said you'd eat your own boots if we found anything but scrap out here. Still might, Elias said, but he didn't look away from the feed. Another silence, this one pregnant with calculation. Alvarez's voice came through, low and even. We're not a boarding team. We're salvage, and protocol says you don't dock with unknowns. But, she paused. The word hung there heavy. We're 3 years in the red, and Command's cut our last 3 contracts. We log this and haul ass. Maybe we'll get a finder's fee. Or we go on board and get a cut of whatever's powering it, Ash said. Jace turned to Elias, eyes hungry. You're the best diver in the cluster. We get you in, you map the interior, we pull out at the first sign of trouble. Elias grinned. If there's anything dangerous in there, it's already been dangerous for 200 years. What's another 5 minutes? Alvarez exhaled, the sound of a woman coming to terms with the inevitable. All right, we'll do a flyby. EVA only. I want helmet cams on and tethers at all times. If anything pings you, you bail. We're not losing anyone over a ghost. Copy, said Elias, already reaching for the mag boots and suit assembly. Jace followed, popping the latches on his own gear. Ash stayed at the console, fingers flying over the screen as she began to draft a full 3D model of the Orpheus from the sensor data. Keep your channel open, diver, Alvarez said. We're running this by the book. Elias' laugh was a short bark, half nerves, half exhilaration. Sure, skipper, by the book. The others joined in, a chorus of nervous energy masking the dread that moved like cold water beneath the deck plates. The ship's small galley became a makeshift prep room. They moved through the motions with the speed of people who'd rehearsed every disaster scenario except this one. Ash patched her camera feed to the suit's HUD, overlaying data as she prepped the airlock. She paused at the viewport, watching the liner loom closer. No longer just a ghostly shape, but a real, solid object, its hull agleam in the distant starlight. She shook her head. You sure you want to do this, diver? Elias sealed his gloves, checked the line on his mag boots and flashed a thumb up. Someone got to make first contact, he said. Jace snorted. Just don't get yourself inducted into the afterlife. Ash managed a smile, thin as tracing paper. No promises. Outside, the Orpheus hung like a fossilized whale, every curve and window perfect, daring them to come closer. The crew of the salvage freighter watched, unable to look away, caught in the tractor beam of history and hunger. As they sealed the airlock behind them, none dared say what they all felt, that the impossible, once invited aboard, never really left. The lock sequence on the salvage freighter coughed them into darkness and cold, with nothing but the hull between them and infinity. Elias led, as promised, his movements slow and confident in the borrowed suit. Behind him, Jace triple-checked the tether points, the mag boots, the slender toolkit at his hip. Ash watched the Orpheus grow in her visor's field, filling every pixel with hull until it was the only world left. The walk across open space was measured in footsteps, each a seismic event for the suit's auditory sensors, a thunk and vibrato as boots yanked themselves to steel and let go, yanked and let go. Ash's comm line filled with nothing but breath and the slow whine of gyros. There was no chatter. Everything essential had already been said. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to check the freighter shrinking behind them. When they reached the Orpheus, Elias ran a gloved hand along the hull, fingers curling around a rail designed for deckhands in a time before vacuum. He paused, angling his helmet for the best view. Manual hatch, starboard side, he said. Ash drifted in beside him. She reached for the latch, expecting corrosion or freeze seal, but the mechanism yielded on first touch, a whisper of pressure, then a pop. A seam of orange light spilled from the hatch, cutting a perfect line across her visor. Jace exhaled, short and sharp. You seeing this, diver? Elias grunted. He shouldered past, boots thunking as he anchored himself at the opening. He peered in, then pulled the door wide. The hinge moved too easily. It felt wrong, like opening a coffin and finding the occupants still breathing. Air hissed past his suit, and with it came a rush of warmth, actual warmth, the kind you feel in a terrarium or an old sauna. Ash's suit sensors chirped a rapid uptick in ambient temperature and humidity, then flagged a wild reading, 23 Celsius, 68% RH. Impossible, she thought, but the numbers didn't lie. They followed Elias in single file, lights bobbing over the curved, opulent corridor. The walls were panelled in rich, dark wood, real wood, or a simulation so perfect the suit's olfactory scrambler couldn't tell the difference. Carpet muffled their steps, plush and thick and oddly damp, like sod after rain. The corridor stretched ahead, empty but for the shadows cast by their lights. Jace scanned the ceiling. How is it not freezing in here? Ash answered without thinking. Power grid must still be running. But to what? Jace muttered. There's no reactor signature. Elias ignored them, eyes locked on a brass directory mounted just inside the hatch. He wiped dust from its face, revealing a map of the Orpheus, 12 decks, 4 lifts, 2 grand staircases. He tapped the route to Observation Lounge and started walking. Jace and Ash fell in behind, the first pair of footsteps erased by the new. The first room they passed was a reading salon. Books on glassy shelves, heavy drapes tied back with gold cord, a piano at the far end with keys yellowed but intact. On the central table, a game of chess sat mid-match, the pieces scattered as if the players had stood and never returned. Ash's camera feed twitched as she zoomed in on a pair of crystal tumblers. They still held a measure of amber liquid, condensation beading the glass. She panned further, cigarette stubbed out, smudge of lipstick on a napkin. Every detail perfect, like a stage set moments before curtain. This is nuts, Jace said, voice tight. No way this stuff would survive more than a week in the void. Elias' light swept the walls, pausing at a painting. Oil on canvas. A seaside vista from an Earth no one on the crew had ever visited. He stared a beat too long before moving on. The corridor opened into the grand ballroom, ceiling arched and inlaid with mirrors. Chandeliers, hundreds of glass droplets, each wired for individual illumination, hung motionless in zero-G, but the lights had been set to a deep, honeyed gold. The floor was checkered marble, perfectly polished. Rows of tables lined the periphery, all draped in pressed linen, place settings arrayed with military precision. The silverware gleamed, each fork and spoon precisely aligned. Elias stopped at the nearest table. He reached out, trailing a fingertip along the rim of a soup bowl. It left a mark in the fine, talc-like dust, a human touch in an inhuman stillness. He looked back at the others. Anything on the bioscanner? Ash checked her wrist. Not a blip, she said. Jace drifted to a serving trolley, inspecting the bottles. His gloved hand picked up a decanter, examining the label. Shatehouse seal, 2120. He set it down carefully, as if waking someone from sleep. Ash moved to the stage at the far end, boots squelching on the carpet. She angled her helmet cam to record everything, narrating for the ship's log. Main ballroom, Orpheus. All interior elements appear original and undisturbed. Ambient temperature and humidity anomalously high for a derelict. No visible life, no sign of struggle or damage. Jace chuckled, the sound thin and brittle through the comms. No rats, no mold, just good taste. They fell quiet, moving as a pack toward the grand staircase. The silence was total, not the sterile silence of the void, but the silence of a place holding its breath. Every time their lights panned over a shadowed alcove or an open doorway, Ash tensed, expecting movement. There was none. They took the stairs 2 at a time, zero-G rendering the grand descent a slow float. The rails were lacquered wood, the banister warm to the touch. Jace ran his fingers along it, leaving 5 lines in the dust. He glanced up, uneasy. This doesn't make sense, he said. The ship, if it's been running for 200 years, shouldn't there be anything, decay, breakdown, entropy? Elias paused on the landing. Maybe it's being maintained. By what, Ash wanted to ask, but she didn't. They reached deck 6. The corridor here was narrower, lined with suites. Every door was closed, brass nameplates shined to a mirror finish. The air was thicker, scented faintly with rose and something like expensive soap. The ambient hum of the ship, barely noticeable before, grew louder, a gentle white noise that crept into their suits. They opened a door at random. Inside, a parlor all white and gold, with a picture window aimed at the stars. 2 chairs faced the view. Between them, a table set for tea, cups clean, sugar cubes neat in a bowl. A copy of some ancient Earth magazine rested on the cushion, its pages curling at the edges. Jace stepped in, helmeted head turning left, right. He squatted to examine a set of slippers under the table. He picked one up, then replaced it. "No bodies," he said. Ash joined him, letting her camera linger on the setting. She could almost picture the ghostly guests, moments from returning. She caught her reflection in the window, suit, helmet, light, an intruder in paradise. Elias drifted to the bar at the far end of the suite. He wiped his finger across the counter. The dust here was less pronounced, as if it had been cleaned recently. He opened a small cooler under the counter. Bottles and mixers, all perfectly arranged. Ice, glistening and untouched, sat in a tray. "This place is a time capsule," Elias said, voice low. "No decay, no pests. It's like it wants us here." Jace let out a breath. Or maybe it wants something else. They filed out, leaving the suite as they found it. Back in the corridor, they advanced deeper into the ship. The lights overhead flickered, responding to their movement, always ahead, never behind. Deck after deck revealed the same. Luxury, preserved at the edge of time, ready for a party that would never begin. They found a gym, dumbbells racked in order, mats rolled tight. A cinema, every seat facing the blank screen, a faint tang of popcorn in the air. A pool, water smooth as black glass, the overhead lighting simulating a noonday sun. At the poolside, Elias paused. He leaned over, touched a finger to the water. It rippled, then settled instantly, as if nothing had disturbed it at all. He looked up. What powers the environmental controls on a ship like this? Ash shrugged, hands out. Diesel, old school, maybe fission if they retrofitted, but nothing would last this long. Jace checked the sensor band again, as if hopping for new data. No life signs, no mechanicals. The air was warm and moist, condensing on the interior of their helmets. Ash wiped her faceplate, letting out a hiss of frustration. "Something keeping this place together," she said, "and it's not engineering." Elias glanced at her, then at the room. Could be automated maintenance, nanotech. "Not this elegant," Jay said. It's curated." They made their way aft, past more lounges, more empty perfection. The sense of wrongness grew with every meter. Ash could feel the ship's design working on her, the urge to remove her helmet, to sit, to eat, to drink, to lose track of time in the way only cruise passengers could. She shuddered and refocused. In the final lounge, Elias paused. The bar was long, a perfect curve of polished wood with a mirrored wall behind. He walked to it, fingers trailing the counter. He stopped at a single glass, upright and clean, as if waiting for an order. He set his hand on the glass and looked at his reflection in the mirror. 3 suited figures, faceless, surrounded by empty velvet stools. He tapped the bar twice, then turned to the others. "This doesn't make any sense," he said, voice flat and final. "No entropy, no crew, no explanation. I don't like it." Neither did the others, but the lure of the impossible was stronger than sense or fear. They stood in the silence, each caught in their own cycle of disbelief, their own search for explanation. Outside, the Orpheus continued its journey, dragging its haunted luxury through space, waiting for new guests to claim their staterooms. They followed the curve of the corridor, the air growing cooler and still as they moved deeper. The next set of doors, massive, arched, and carved with oceanic relief, opened at a touch. Elias stepped through, suit lights sweeping over the threshold. They entered the Orpheus's main dining hall, and all 3 had to stop, just to absorb the scale. The ceiling rose 3 stories, vaulting into shadow. Chandeliers, every crystal drop a gleam, hung in slow suspension, each bulb lit to a faint golden glow. The tables stretched away in symmetrical lines, each set for 8 or 10, fine linen draped like fresh snow. Ash's suit HUD tagged over 100 tables. Each was ready for service, with place cards, goblets, and plates arranged for a feast no one ever attended. "Jesus," Ash whispered, her breath fogging the interior of her helmet. Elias advanced, boots muffled by a Persian run the length of a city block. The entire room was perfectly preserved. There was no dust here, no evidence of time's passage. A series of stained glass windows ran along the far wall, showing stylized ocean waves and solar flares in a riot of color. Even the centerpiece displays, ice sculptures, fruit pyramids, bouquets, looked freshly assembled. They split to cover more ground. Ash began filming, her camera sweeping across the tables, zooming in on details. The condensation on a wine glass, a napkin folded into a perfect swan, the embossed gold of the Orpheus logo on a menu. Jace worked methodically, lifting domed covers to inspect the meals beneath. Most were empty, but a few revealed food, still vibrant in color, as if frozen seconds after plating. He lifted one cover, paused, then set it down with careful deliberation. "It's not decayed," he said. "It's not even cold." Ash moved to his side, peering in. The cut of steak looked seared minutes ago, juices congealed but not spoiled. She waved her hand over the plate, suit sensors confirming warmth. "How?" she murmured. Elias ignored the food, focusing on the dais at the far end. A table there, longer than the rest, was set for 30 or more. The place cards were handwritten, each one different. He moved along the row, reading names, some famous from history, some unknown. He paused at a card labeled in careful script, Captain L. Brannigan. The chair behind it was pushed out, at an angle. Elias set his gloved hand on the seat back, then recoiled. The fabric was still warm. He looked up, called to the others. "You need to see this." Ash and Jace joined him, reading the names in silence. Ash pulled the chair further from the table, inspecting it. "Feels like someone just stood up." Jace didn't laugh, didn't make a joke. He turned slowly, scanning the room with his suit's enhanced vision. His light caught a movement, a ripple in the air, near the center of the hall. He stiffened. "You see that?" Elias shook his head. "See what?" Jace pointed. Something just moved, there by the middle column. Ash toggled her optics to match Jace's. For a second, nothing. Then a flicker, a distortion like heat haze. It passed between tables, vanishing behind a pillar. The three of them froze. For several seconds, only the hum of the ship and their own breathing filled the silence. Elias spoke first, quiet but unshaken. "We're not alone." He set his hand on the table again, fingers resting on the gold-edged plate. This time, nothing happened. He looked at Ash and Jace, face unreadable behind his helmet. Ash toggled her comm, whispering to Skipper back on the freighter. "Alvarez, you're getting this." A lag, then Alvarez's voice. "Getting what?" "Interior's not empty," Ash said, voice clipped. "We have movement, environmental anomalies, food is fresh." Alvarez was silent for a moment then. "You have 40 minutes, then exfil. Keep logging." They advanced with more caution now, every step deliberate, eyes watching the mirrors overhead as much as the floor ahead. As they documented, a sound began to emerge, at first so faint it seemed imagined. A tap, then another, like a single raindrop hitting a tin roof. Then the sound multiplied, echoing up from every table. Elias stopped walking. "Hear that?" Jace nodded, face drained. "Yeah." The taps became a patter, then a clatter, growing in volume and complexity. It was unmistakable, the sound of cutlery, hundreds of pieces clinking against plates. Glasses chiming, chairs shifting. The steady hum of conversation. At first a background murmur, then the distinct cadence of laughter, a burst of applause. The room was still visibly empty. Every table, every chair, every inch of floor. But the sounds continued, building until the air vibrated with the din of a banquet in full swing. Ash stood in the aisle, camera panning frantically. Her gloved hands shook as she narrated. Audio log, timestamp. There's a dinner service happening, but the room is empty. Repeat, the room is empty. Elias advanced to the center of the hall, moving through the space as if it were packed with invisible guests. The sounds adjusted with him, a gap of silence where he stood, the party resuming just behind. He stopped at a table, set both hands on its surface, and leaned in. The laughter rose, a high shriek, and then cut off. For a heartbeat, total silence returned. Jace edged closer, voice hoarse. Elias, let's bail. This is too much. Ash nodded, backing away. But as she did, a chair scraped back, the movement loud as a gunshot. The chair rotated slowly, as if someone had just risen and was looking right at her. Ash yelped, stumbling back into a server's cart. Bottles clattered, but nothing spilled. Elias straightened, still in the thick of the phantom crowd. It's like we're walking through a memory, he said, more to himself than to the others. Ash shook her head. Memories don't push chairs. The laughter resumed, louder than before. Applause, shouts, the unmistakable tink of a fork against a glass for a toast. The chandeliers above flickered, casting spiderweb shadows that seemed to crawl across the tablecloths. The sensation of being watched intensified, the air thickening with expectation. Elias looked around, then spoke to his helmet mic. If anyone's here, show yourself. The words echoed, bouncing from wall to wall, then faded into the party noise. Jace began to retreat, slow at first, then faster. Ash followed, holding her camera in front like a shield. But as they neared the door, it swung shut with a click. All at once, the hall quieted. The three stood, breath-heavy, hearts hammering. Then the applause started, slow, deliberate, building to a frenzy. The invisible guests were celebrating, and the sound pinned the boarders to the floor. Elias stared at the dais, eyes locked on the empty captain's chair. He stepped forward, pulling it out, and sat down. Instantly, the room filled with voices, 1,000 conversations, overlapping, urgent. For a moment, Ash and Jace heard their own names, spoken in voices they recognized but couldn't place. Then the voices faded, leaving only a single icy whisper. Welcome back. Jace reached for Elias, yanking him up from the chair. The voices cut off, replaced by the steady chime of cutlery. Ash struggled with the door, then found it unlatched. She flung it open, the phantom noise retreating as quickly as it had come. They staggered into the corridor, the heat and humidity now replaced by a clammy chill. Behind them, the party noises persisted, though muffled by the sealed doors. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then, in a whisper that could barely be heard, Ash said, "We need to go." Elias looked back at the doors. His hands shook, but his face was calm. "Not yet," he said. "There's more, and it knows we're here now." They stood in silence, listening to the distant, invisible celebration, the sound of the impossible echoing down the hall. Chapter 2. The next corridor shimmered with reflections. Above, the chandeliers carried the same warm glow as before, but the walls here had picked up a strange patina, as if centuries of dust had been buffed to a perfect gloss. The trio moved single file, helmet lights cutting overlapping cones on the lacquered doors, the mag boots planting with a deliberate click on marble inlays. No one commented on the laughter from the ballroom. It had faded as quickly as it began, replaced by the ordinary hush of abandoned space. But the silence felt wrong now, hollowed out. The group kept to the center of the hall, every movement loaded with the memory of what wasn't there. Jace took the point, checking every third door as he advanced. The pattern was always the same, suite, salon, suite. Each open to untouched splendor. Each had its own small detail of arrested time. A coat still draped over a chair, a half-finished drink on a counter, a printout of the daily activities left on a credenza, corners curled with age but not rot. Jace called out the anomalies, voice level and even. Suite 111, all clear, still made up for guests, no signs of entry. He pulled back, next door. Reading lounge. Lights on, auto-tint glass still cycling with the starfield. Ash paused at the threshold, scanning the panel. She touched a gloved finger to the wall interface, which responded with a muted trill and a fanfare of pastel color. Power's running on emergency grid, but there's a memory trace. Last guest was registered 2 centuries ago. Elias hung back, watching the sweep of the helmet lights across velvet runners and antique bookcases. He ran a fingertip along the edge of a leather-bound atlas, then snapped a photo with his forearm scanner. "If this is a trap," he said, "it's a pretty one." "Not a trap," said Ash. "Not unless ghosts write guest logs." Elias grunted and took the lead. They passed the last of the suites, turned a corner, and found themselves at another set of double doors, gilded, heavier than before. The words Lido Promenade glittered overhead in flawless serif. Jace tried the door. It resisted, then slid open on a slow pneumatic hiss. Beyond was a circular atrium, the deck sloping up and away like a planetarium dome. At the center, a raised platform encircled a sculpture of glass and metal, something between a coral reef and a cloud of starlings, all frozen in flight. The walls rippled with indirect light, simulating the sky at dusk, with sun flares and cirrus clouds painted by algorithm. Ash's sensors registered a spike in ambient humidity. "That's not simulated," she said. "There's water somewhere." They moved into the atrium, boots softly thudding on carpet that had never seen a spill. The next anomaly was audible even before they entered the next room. The shiver of glasses, the distant clink of cutlery, and underneath it all, a low river of conversation. The next room swallowed sound as well as light. A tight corridor branched into a clutch of smaller rooms, offices, suites, workstations. Ash advanced first, sweeping with the scanner. The device beeped in slow, hollow intervals, each ping confirming what they already knew. No life, no heat, nothing but the afterimage of purpose. They rounded a corner and entered the communications suite. The door, heavy with a starburst of brassy inlays, stood open. Inside, a bank of monitors sat flush in the wall, each framed by dials and ivory toggles. Most of the screens were dark, but one flickered with a line of blue light, the cursor frozen mid-blink. Jace lingered at the threshold, glancing behind with the look of someone checking a memory that wouldn't resolve. Elias took the lead, crossing the carpet and crouching in front of the old-fashioned keyboard. His breath fogged the glass for a moment, then cleared. Ash stood a step behind, her hands tense on the scanner. She didn't look at the equipment, she watched the door. "Nothing like this in the registry photos," Elias muttered, not expecting a response. He tapped the keys, careful, as if the console might shatter under his hands. The blue light responded, the screen's ghost letters resolving into a block of text. He read aloud, voice scraping out each word. "Ship's log, day 217. Cruise operations continuing as scheduled despite engineering's concerns about the unusual readings from ballast tanks. All guests accounted for. Captain urges calm among crew." He scrolled down, eyes scanning for something useful. Day 218. Several service staff reported duplicate sightings of guests in restricted areas. Security checks negative. Environmental controls stable. No deviation in power systems. A few lines down, he stopped, jaw tightening. Day 219. Captain insists we maintain normal routines despite flickering lights and atmospheric fluctuations. Passengers remain unaware. Ash leaned over his shoulder. The logs continued in the same vein. Every day a facsimile of the last, with nothing acknowledged, no break in routine, even as reality began to ripple at the edges. Jace edged further in, his hands loose at his sides, eyes tracking over the consoles. "It's like they just refused to see it," he said. Elias kept scrolling, speed increasing. No mention of the ship's location, no distress calls. Even after 2 centuries, they're still on schedule. Ash watched the reflection of the screen in the polished console, words flickering up and away like the ghost of paper. A new log entry materialized at the top of the list. Date, 5 minutes prior. The room went rigid. Elias' voice went low. Someone's still logging entries. A faint hum vibrated through the floor, a pulse that grew, then receded, like an engine cycling up. Overhead, the lights dimmed, then surged, the warm glow gaining an edge of blue-white. The sudden change set their shadows jumping across the walls. Jace looked at Ash. "We need to tell Skipper we're not alone." Ash nodded, though her gaze was fixed on the screen. "The system isn't even on backup," she said, thumbing the scanner. "Nothing's drawing power. This should be cold." As if in answer, the nearest monitor flickered to life. A grainy camera feed showed the grand ballroom empty again, but the chandeliers swinging gently, as if in an unseen breeze. The feed jumped. Now the corridor outside, the lens fogged with static, and a blurred shape passing through frame too quick to register. Jace backed away from the console, the movement making Ash flinch. She let go of the scanner with a brittle snap. Her knuckles were white, fingers trembling. Elias' attention stayed glued to the log. "There's a pattern," he said. "Every mention of environmental spikes, every time something off happens, they write it up and move on like it's protocol." Jace shook his head, eyes darting to the door and back. "It's not human. None of this is." The air in the room shifted, a pressure drop so subtle it could have been a trick of nerves. Ash set the scanner on the desk and braced herself, elbows locked, chest tight against the edge. Then the PA system activated, the speakers rasping to life with a hiss. A woman's voice, bright and lilting, broke the silence. "Attention, valued guests of the Orpheus. Tonight's entertainment begins at 1900 hours in the Grand Salon. Please remember to visit the Lido deck for cocktail hour and sunset viewing. As always, dinner will be served in the main hall. Enjoy your voyage." The three of them froze. Ash's scanner, now forgotten on the desk, registered a spike in electromagnetic output, then flatlined. She stared at the display, face drained of color. Jace swallowed, voice cracking as he spoke. "There's no generator online, Ash. You said it yourself." She nodded mute, eyes wide and wet. Elias let the words hang in the air. For a few seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. The voice continued, cycling through the evening's schedule as if nothing were amiss. "And please remember, pool access is reserved for first-class guests after 20:00. Lifeguards will be present for your safety." Elias finally broke the spell, closing the log with a sharp click. "We have to check the Lido deck," he said. "It's in the logs. That's where the anomaly started." Jace rounded on him. "Are you crazy? Did you not hear that? The ship is," he gestured to the room at a loss for language, "doing things. Let's get the data and bail." "We have to see it," Elias said, voice flat. "Otherwise we bring back nothing but a story. We bring Skipper a story, and we're dead in the water." Ash stared at the ceiling, the speakers still faintly ticking with residual static. She flexed her hands, working blood back into her fingers. "If we go," she said, "we go together." No one objected. Elias jammed a drive into the console, started a dump of the logs. His hands shook, but he masked it with speed, refusing to look at Ash or Jace. When the download finished, he wiped sweat from his brow, condensation pooling on the inside of his helmet. Ash scooped up the scanner and double-checked her suit seals. She watched the screen flicker again, the corridor camera now showing a still image. The three of them, standing in the comms suite, watched from some impossible vantage. She turned away. They retraced their path through the corridor, every door now feeling like the mouth of a cave. Ash took point, Elias in the middle, Jace bringing up the rear with a constant, nervous scan over his shoulder. They moved in silence, save for the hiss of their breath and the occasional squeak of mag boots on tile. The ship was awake now, or something in it. Each light fixture blinked as they passed. Each PA speaker buzzed with a whisper of static, as if recording their footsteps for later playback. At the central stairwell, they paused. The corridor to the Lido deck was straight ahead, a tunnel lined with palm-printed wallpaper and fake potted plants still perfectly green. Elias led the way, voice dry in the comms. Almost there. Jace didn't reply, too busy glancing back at the shadowed hallway behind. Ash's hands were steady now, but her jaw locked tight, teeth pressed together until her head ached. She counted the steps, counting out loud in her head, refusing to let the soundscape slip back to the dinner party's laughter. The Lido deck's doors loomed ahead, larger and more ornate than any before. The brass inlay caught the corridor's light, reflecting it in twisted, geometric patterns. For a moment, Ash's helmet light picked up a flash of movement beyond the frosted glass. A ripple, a shadow, then nothing. She hesitated, hand raised to the panel. "Ready," she said, and for a second no one answered. Jace grunted, "Just get it over with." Elias nodded. Ash pressed the panel. The doors slid open, silent and smooth, revealing the Orpheus's final marvel. They stepped into the simulated daylight of the Lido deck, and the ship, waiting for them, welcomed its new guests in. The Lido deck presented a contradiction. Daylight engineered, the sun a disk of LEDs behind glass, and every square meter scrubbed to a shine that defied entropy. Deck chairs formed perfect ranks along the tiled margin. The pool itself glowed at the center, blacker than the void outside, liquid surface so still it might have been a lacquered sculpture. The three entered in a line, their helmets and boots out of place against the soft whites and beechwood browns of the room. Ash scanned first. Every plant real, every towel fluff-dried and folded by invisible hands, the air warm and clean, with a touch of ozone and fake ocean salt. The pool drew the eye immediately. Its water, if it was water, seemed to suck light from the room. No reflections, no surface movement. Just a blank plane, and beneath, not tiles but a projection of deep space. Stars not native to any sky they'd ever navigated, scattered in patterns that refused to repeat. Elias stepped closer, as if compelled. "You seeing this?" he asked. His visor recorded the starfield, mapping it, but the software choked and crashed with every attempt to plot coordinates. Ash circled to the other side, boots squeaking on tile. She passed a lifeguard station, the chair empty, a red whistle coiled on the seat. She reached out, picked it up and dropped it again. It fell with the sound of plastic on stone, normal and not. Jace trailed slower. He lagged at the door, staring down at the water's edge. "I'm getting readings," he said, but didn't finish the sentence. He knelt, hands on his knees, staring into the false cosmos. At first, Ash thought the room was silent, but then came the sound, a ripple, a splash, faint but real. She swung her scanner up. "Did you hear that?" "Negative," Elias said, but he was already at the lip, peering down. The black surface held perfect, unbroken. He reached for a cleaning net by the pool, but the plastic mesh dissolved in his grip, the stick's tip softened to powder. He let it go and stepped back. "Skipper, you getting this?" Elias called over the comm. "We've got an anomaly in the main pool. He searched for words. Non-reflective but active, possible energy source beneath." Ash kept her distance, checking every angle with her device. Nothing on thermal, nothing on M, but something's moving. Might be beneath the pool liner or... She never finished. Jace, still kneeling, leaned closer to the water as if mesmerized. The constellations changed as he moved, stars blurring and popping into new formations. He extended a gloved hand, hovering a centimeter above the black. "This isn't water," he said, voice hollow. "It's like looking into space itself." Elias edged around, careful. "Don't touch it," he said, but too late. Jace, his gloved fingers trembling, dipped them into the surface. For a moment, nothing happened. The water remained perfectly still. Then the blackness shivered. The stars below twisted, forming a spiral, and the water climbed Jace's hand like a living thing. His wrist vanished, then his forearm, swallowed in a second. Jace tried to pull away, but the surface refused to let go. It yanked him downward with such force his helmet banged the pool lip, cracking the faceplate. Jace screamed, a sound that cut across the comms and into Ash's spine. The pool's surface bulged, pulling him in up to his shoulder. Ash rushed forward, grabbing his other arm. She braced a boot on the wet deck, but the pull was too strong. The force lifted her toes from the ground, and she nearly toppled head first. Elias moved in, grabbing Jace's ankle, both men straining against the suction. The comms filled with Jace's panicked gasps and a rush of static. Then, with a sickening lurch, the pool swallowed Jace whole. Ash's hands scraped down the length of his suit, then clapped together on empty air. The comms cut out. Ash fell back, sprawling onto the tile. Her scanner skidded and spun, coming to rest against a drain. She stared at her hands, flexing the fingers, as if expecting them to dissolve too. Elias stood perfectly still at the pool's edge, helmet tilted down at the water. The black surface was smooth again, unbroken. The only sign of violence was a single glove, torn from Jace's hand, floating on the surface. Ash crawled to it, scooped it up, and turned it over. It was empty, the inside lined with a wetness that shimmered with starlight. She looked up at Elias. He shook his head once, sharp, then thumbed the comm. "Skipper, we've lost Jace," he said, voice flat. "He's gone. The pool, it took him." A long delay, then Skipper's voice. Define took. Elias stared at the pool, as if expecting it to answer. Pulled him under. No trace. It's not water, it's some kind of event horizon. Ash stared at the glove, her mind numb. She rocked on her heels, still trying to make sense of the stars on the pool floor. Elias leaned over, scanning the surface. If it's a portal, it's one way. If it's a predator, it's selective. Ash stood, her knees trembled. She stepped back from the pool, every instinct in her body screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room, so perfect a minute ago, now felt like a stage set for a vanished audience. Elias looked at Ash, his eyes hard. "We're getting off this ship." Ash nodded, lips pressed white. She followed as Elias led the way out, boots slapping the tiles. The pool behind them was silent, its surface unbroken, reflecting nothing but the memory of stars. As the doors shut behind them, the PA system chimed again, the same cheerful voice. "Attention, evening swim has concluded. Lifeguards will be on duty until midnight. Thank you for choosing Orpheus for your luxury voyage." Ash clutched the empty glove, her hands shaking, and tried to remember what it felt like to be safe. Chapter 3. Ash stood for a long minute in the corridor outside the Lido deck, helmet pressed to her own reflection in a pane of glass that overlooked nothing. Her breath fogged the inside of her visor, then vanished, over and over. Behind her, Elias paced with the stiff gait of a man caught between decision and instinct, one hand squeezing the other's wrist with increasing force. The ship had gone quiet. The warm, nearly living hum that underpinned the Orpheus's atmosphere had given way to a dull, droning silence. It was the silence of a building after hours, a hush that felt practiced, almost smug, as if the liner were congratulating itself on its latest trick. Ash flexed her hands, rubbing the gloves together. She watched the pattern of condensation and tried to measure her own heartbeat by the pulse in her fingertips. "We move now," she said, and turned from the window. Elias nodded, more to himself than to her. He looked back at the Lido deck doors, then down at the mag boot tracks they'd left on the carpet. "What about Jace?" he said, though it sounded like a reflex more than a hope. Ash closed her hands into fists. "We saw what happened." A pause, just long enough to let the words ferment. Elias grunted and started down the hall, footsteps planting hard and sure, as if force could undo the geometry of the ship. Ash fell in behind, eyes on the path. She counted every arch and sconce, every bit of ornamentation, and checked it against memory. She logged the walk before, mapped it. She could recite every turn. But the first left was gone. The second junction bent back toward the center, merging into a branch that shouldn't have been there. The numbers on the staterooms were unchanged, but the sequence skipped. A 307 after a 302, a 309 across from 308, but no 305 anywhere in between. Ash pulled up the deck plan on her wrist display, letting the flicker of the schematic overlay the corridor. The Orpheus's architecture was perfect in her model. But the corridor stretched, shrank, then split, each recalculation followed by a haptic tremor from the device. Elias walked faster, almost running, until the corridor ended in a wall of polished brass. The Orpheus logo, a stylized lyre, glimmered at the center. He ran a palm across the seam, pushing, then pounding with the heel of his hand. "This isn't right," he said. "This is the main corridor, it should." "Connect to portside deck 3, I know," Ash finished. She reached out, touching the wall beside him. It was cold, unyielding. "Backtrack, next junction." They turned and retraced their steps, but the route was subtly different. A mirror that wasn't there before. A mural of sunbathers by the pool, their faces smeared with a painter's thumb. Ash tried a door at random. It opened on a suite, immaculate, a bowl of fruit and a bottle of champagne on the table. The cork was missing, the glass flute still sparkling with bubbles. She shut the door, trying not to listen to the faint echo of laughter from within. They made the next turn, and the ship gave up its first real joke. The corridor ended in another blank wall, this one panelled in wood, inset with a single brass plaque. Elias read the plaque. His lips moved behind the visor. "No exit," he said, and barked a laugh. It sounded almost healthy, but his face went red above the jawline. Ash pulled up the comms and hailed the freighter. "Skipper, we're returning to airlock. Docking point is not accessible. Ship architecture is unstable. Repeat, not per deck plan. Request external beacon for visual." A moment's delay, then the familiar, clipped voice of Alvarez. "Copy, Ash. Got your transponder. You're 15 meters off the entry point, direct line. What's the holdup?" Ash checked her own display. The corridor was straight, should have brought them to the airlock in 10 steps, but the distance counter had barely budged. "Skipper, we're hitting physical obstructions. Corridors sealed, no logical exit. Could be active security protocol, or..." She cut herself off. "Or what?" Alvarez asked. Static fuzzed the channel, the carrier wave warbling with feedback. Ash glanced at Elias, who shrugged and kept walking, trying every door as he passed. "Or the ship doesn't want us leaving," Ash said. She tried to keep her tone flat, but the words sharpened on the way out. Alvarez answered with a sigh. "You've got 5 minutes. If you're not at the hatch, we break docking and cut you loose." Elias grinned, showing teeth. "Wouldn't be the first time." They took the next turn, then another, but each new corridor was a copy of the last. Identical fixtures, identical layout, only the small details off. Sometimes a sconce flickered and spat. Sometimes the numbers on the staterooms ran backward, descending into the negatives. Once, the same portrait of a bearded man in captain's dress appeared 3 times in a row. Each frame hung at a different angle. The pattern was obvious now. The ship was folding around them, not like a puzzle, but like a trick of mirrors. Every attempt to exit returned them to a corridor just different enough to seed doubt. Elias tried a stairwell, yanking the door open and peering up. The stairs twisted in a spiral, then straightened, then doubled back into the same landing. He stomped up, counting steps. At the top, the next deck was an exact copy of the one they just left. The same mural, the same missing number. The air was warm and dense, with a trace of brine, as if the Orpheus had decided to restore its own microclimate out of spite. Ash followed, her boots dragging a beat behind. "It's looping us," she said, more to herself than to Elias. Elias ignored her, bounding up the next flight. He opened the door at the landing and found himself face to face with a wall of dark glass. Beyond the glass, space, and the distant lights of their freighter, hovering in station keep. He rapped the glass with his knuckle. "Ash, look." She stepped in beside him. The view was wrong, too close, too angled. She checked the schematic and saw that they should be on an interior deck, not the outer hull. "Skipper," she said, patching through the comms again, "we have a visual on you. Can you ping our location?" A pause, then Alvarez. "You're 2 meters from the airlock, Ash. Punch through if you have to." Ash braced herself and pressed both hands against the glass. She could see the comms antenna of their ship, maybe 20 paces away. She pressed harder. The glass flexed, but did not break. Elias growled, then drew back and kicked at the seam with all his weight. The impact echoed through the deck, a note that went up and never resolved. On the third kick, the wall softened, not breaking but deforming, a ripple moving through the glass like water. Elias stumbled back, then lunged again. The glass parted, and for a heartbeat she saw the void outside, then the wall sealed itself, leaving not a mark. Ash exhaled, her chest tight. The PA system came on, voice soft as a pillow. "Dear guests, please do not tamper with the decor. For your safety, all egress points are temporarily sealed during shipboard emergencies." Elias spat on the wall, a fleck of condensation fogging his visor. Ash keyed her wrist and started mapping the route backwards, counting every intersection, every possible branch. She traced the deck plan, then stopped. "Elias," she said, pointing at the schematic. "If we get to the main stair, we can cut through the service crawlway. Should link up to the old engineering access." Elias nodded, already moving. He took the stairs 3 at a time, fists clenched. The corridor at the bottom was darker, and the plush carpeting was gone, just cold steel and the scuffed lines of service carts. They followed the path, winding through narrower and narrower corridors, the lights flickering with every step. The air here was still, stale, the scent of ozone sharp and immediate. At the final turn, the passage ended in a hatch. Ash pressed the panel. It opened with a hiss. Inside, a tiny service closet, barely room for both of them. The opposite wall was lined with bins, cleaning fluid, towels, a rack of perfect white gloves. A single maintenance panel blinked red. Elias cursed, then hit the panel with his palm. It sparked, but nothing happened. Ash stared at the gloves, then at her own hands. She set Jace's glove on the shelf, fingers outstretched, like a message for the next intruder. She drew a slow breath and radioed Skipper again. "Negative on egress. The ship's architecture is unstable, possibly non-Euclidean. Request suggestions." Alvarez's voice was rough, tired. "You're not making sense, Ash. The hull cams have you standing right by the hatch." Ash looked at Elias, then back at the panel. "There is no hatch," she said. "Not on our end." A silence stretched, then Alvarez, "What do you see?" Ash closed her eyes, then opened them, taking in the tiny closet, the red light, the rack of gloves. She tried to describe it, but the words tangled in her throat. Elias growled, "It's a box, Skipper, no way out." The comms went dead. For a moment, nothing but their own breath and the pulse of the warning light. Then the PA system flickered on again, voice syrupy with cheer. "Guests are reminded that all detours are part of the Orpheus experience. Please enjoy the complimentary amenities while we resolve your journey." Elias punched the wall, then slumped to the floor, head between his knees. Ash stared at the light, watching the pattern. 3 seconds on, 2 off. Repeat. She set her helmet against the wall and let the ship's silence envelop her. They were not going anywhere. The closet opened not to the corridor they'd left, but to a new one. Narrower, the carpet a flat grey, the walls unadorned, but for a thin line of gold leaf running at shoulder height. The air smelled different here, sharper, tinged with a hospital's bleach. For a moment, Ash and Elias stood still, neither trusting the evidence of their senses. Ash broke the standoff first, stepping into the corridor and pivoting to scan both directions. She reached out and touched the wall. It was warmer than her glove, like the skin of something alive. "Skipper, respond," she said into her comms. "We're somewhere. Junction set is unfamiliar. Map doesn't match." A burst of static, then Alvarez. "Copy, Ash. Your signal's moving, but external sensors show you in the same place as before." Ash shook her head. "Negative. Layouts changed. Request visual confirmation." A hiss then. "Visual shows empty corridor. No doors, no windows, just bulkhead. But you're still transmitting audio." Elias leaned in, speaking over her shoulder. "Is Jace's beacon showing?" A pause, then Skipper. "No beacon, only the two of you." Elias grunted and started walking, boots silent on the new carpet. Ash followed, keeping a hand on the wall, as if afraid the corridor would collapse without contact. They moved in tandem, the only sound the faint, regular tick of their suit fans. The corridor bent, then dropped away in a sharp incline, almost a ramp. At the bottom, it spilled into a vestibule lined with mirrors. The mirrors reflected them perfectly, except that, in each, the background was different. One showed a lushly appointed hallway, another a marble staircase, and another a fog-shrouded promenade under the stars. The Ash and Elias in the mirrors moved in concert, but the world behind them disagreed. Elias swore under his breath, then picked a door at random, a nondescript slab set flush to the wall. It opened to the reading lounge they passed earlier, though now the lights were off, and all the books had been rearranged into neat, alphabetized ranks. A fireplace, cold before, now glowed with the light of real fire. It even threw heat. Ash lingered at the threshold, her attention snagged by the motion at the far end. Two figures, arm in arm, dressed in formal cruise attire, walking away down a corridor that couldn't possibly connect to this room. Elias called out, "Hey!" But the pair didn't break stride. They shimmered, their reflections lingering in the glass of the nearby cases even after they'd rounded a corner and disappeared. Ash entered the room, her boots clapping on the hardwood. The scent of smoke and old paper was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. She made a show of checking the books, running a finger down a spine, then opened a side door, hopping to find a shortcut, or at least a less predatory architecture. The door led to a lounge, this one alive with light and music. Inside, a dozen figures, all in evening dress, chatting and drinking. At the bar, a white-jacketed attendant poured champagne. The air was filled with laughter and the glitter of glass. But as Ash and Elias stepped inside, the entire room vanished. Guests, bartender, even the drinks, all replaced by dust and silence. The only sign of their presence was a single, still-wet ring on the polished bar. Elias ran a hand through his hair. "It's baiting us," he said, voice low. Ash said nothing, but she watched the glass ring, waiting for it to evaporate. The ship's lights flickered, and the room's PA system coughed to life. The announcement was smooth, almost unctuous. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain cordially invites you to the grand ballroom for tonight's gala. Formal attire required. All guests in attendance, please." The voice stuttered at the end, a brief glitch of static. Then it resumed, repeating the message. Elias made for the door, then stopped. The corridor outside was gone, replaced by a spiral staircase that descended into blue-lit mist. "You see that?" he said, and Ash nodded, though her eyes stayed on the lounge. They took the stairs together, Ash first this time. At the bottom, the deck was a chaos of contradictions. Stateroom doors with random numbers, elevator doors opening onto bare shaft, then closing again. Overhead, the lights chased each other in a broken pattern, leaving shadows that didn't match the movement of the bodies below. For the first time, Ash saw other people. Not just one or two, but dozens in ones and twos, all in vintage cruise wear. They moved in little circles, never intersecting, always with a kind of glazed, frantic purpose. None acknowledged Ash or Elias. Some repeated a gesture, a wave, a laugh, a swig from a glass, over and over, until the movement broke down into a spasm. Then they drifted away, evaporating into thin air. Elias reached for one, a woman in a crimson dress, her hair styled in perfect 1930s waves. His hand passed through her arm. She flickered, reset, and moved on, her laughter echoing behind. Ash tried the elevator. The call button responded, but the doors opened on a void so black it seemed to eat the light of her helmet. She jabbed the panel, but the lights inside didn't match any numbering she recognized. Negative floors, imaginary decks, whole labels written in dead languages. The elevator doors closed. The next time they opened, a different corridor waited, a memory of the first, but now with all the signage replaced. Instead of ballroom, the arrows pointed to observation deck and infinity pool. Instead of sweet numbers, the doors bore names: Styx, Lethe, Elysium. Each was open just a crack, as if waiting for someone to push through. Elias checked his own wrist display, then smacked it against the wall. "It's garbage," he said. "It's feeding us loops." Ash nodded. She tried the radio again. "Skipper, do you copy? Docking geometry's gone wild. We have no sight of origin point." A crackle, then Skipper's voice, warped and uncertain. "Confirmed. External sensors show access points sealed. The entire hull is shifting. Never seen anything like it." Elias leaned close to Ash, voice barely a whisper. "If we run the main corridor, maybe we can outpace it." She didn't reply, but followed as he charged down the hallway. The carpet, now a deep blue, absorbed the sound of their steps. The walls bent, then twisted, opening onto a viewing platform above the grand ballroom. Below, 100 figures danced, their movements precise and mechanical. The orchestra played, but the musicians were faceless mannequins in perfect tuxedos. The dancers turned in unison, every spiral a repetition of the last. Elias gripped the rail, eyes tracking the movement on the floor. "Is that?" He stopped, then pointed at the far end. At the head table sat the bearded man from the portrait, glass raised in a silent toast. Around him, the partygoers raised their own glasses, the movement synchronized, almost military. Ash scanned the crowd and spotted at the edge a figure in a salvage suit, a match to their own. The helmeted head turned, and for a moment Ash saw herself in the visor. It lifted a glass, then stood and melted into the crowd. She looked away, heartbeat thumping in her ears. A chime sounded from above, the old-fashioned dinner bell. The dancers stopped, every head turning to the platform where Ash and Elias stood. Then the ballroom below dissolved into darkness, the entire crowd erased like a wiped slate. A second later, the floor below them was empty, just polished marble and the shadow of the chandelier, swinging with a rhythm that matched Ash's pulse. The lights flickered again, and this time the PA system did not announce a party. Instead, it whispered, the words smeared with static. "Tonight's guests of honor, please proceed to the promenade for final seating. We await your presence." Ash put her hand on the railing. It felt hot, as if the metal had been left in the sun. Elias whispered, "It knows we're here." Ash nodded, then took the lead, walking the perimeter of the balcony. The doors at the far end, once sealed, now open, beckoned them into a corridor of mirrored panels, each reflecting not the present but some other event. The first time aboard, the Lido deck, the pool, the reading room. They walked, not speaking, until the corridor ended in another door. This one bore no markings, only a thumb-sized indentation for a hand. Ash reached out, pressed the pad. The door swung open onto a replica of their own ship's airlock. Inside, it was empty. No ladder, no controls, just a hollow shell painted with the right serial numbers. She stepped in, and the door closed behind. Elias followed, his breath loud in the cramped space. The PA system intoned, "Thank you for joining us. The voyage will continue shortly." Elias pounded the wall, and a sliver of the facade peeled away, revealing only another door. They were still on the Orpheus, and the ship had not yet finished with them. The airlock replica was a dead end. No ladder, no controls, nothing but the close stink of synthetic leather and the memory of a way home. Ash and Elias stood shoulder to shoulder in the space, listening to the ship's steady thrum, each breath hot with frustration. Elias was the first to break. He slammed a fist against the panel, then again, until the wall flexed and buckled inward. But instead of cold metal or the reassuring lattice of salvage vessel construction, the wall gave way into a foyer lit by dozens of tiny, candle-bright bulbs. The sudden shift was dizzying, but neither flinched. They stepped through the hole, and the door sealed behind them with a soft, almost parental click. The foyer was new, a part of the Orpheus they hadn't logged or mapped. The air was cool and fresh, scented with crushed mint and something floral. In the center stood a directory, brass-framed and backlit with faint blue. The top read, "Guests of the Orpheus." Ash moved closer, eyes scanning the list. She found their names near the bottom, written in the same looping hand as the ancient passenger manifests. Underneath, in smaller script, it read, "Party of 3." The name Jace appeared below, half erased but still legible. Elias snorted, a humorless sound. "We're not dead yet," he said. The directory was interactive. Ash traced the edge, and the display shifted, cycling through a map of the liner's decks. None of the routes matched their original scans. Corridors spiraled out and doubled back, decks merged, some vanished. Every route converged at one location, the promenade. She pointed it out, but Elias was already moving. "If there's an emergency exit, it's there," he said. The corridor beyond the foyer was wide and bright, lined with windows showing a panorama of stars. The path ahead curved, then split into two, one toward the pool, the other to the promenade. Without a word, they took the latter. At first, the walk was uneventful. The lights overhead glowed a gentle gold, and the only sound was the soft hush of filtered air. But after a few turns, the Orpheus started to play its old tricks. First came the voices, low, murmured conversations just out of earshot. Then the laughter, echoing from behind a closed door. Elias ignored it, but Ash paused, catching the end of a phrase in a familiar timbre. She hesitated, then shook her head and kept moving. Next came the footprints, a trail of wet, heavy treads leading down the carpet. The print was too wide for a passenger. It matched a standard-issue salvage boot, the same kind Jace wore. They followed the trail, careful not to comment. It led them through a series of ballrooms, each staged for a party, every table set and every chair turned slightly askew, as if the guests had just left. In one, a phonograph played a waltz, the needle stuck at the last groove. The music was warped and sticky, looping back on itself every 8 bars. At the far end, the prints grew erratic. One set disappeared into a side door. The other, smaller and drier, continued along the main corridor. Ash stopped, finger on her comm. "Skipper, do you copy?" Static, then a shriek of feedback. No answer. Elias said, "We stick to the main route. If we double back, we'll never get out." The corridor narrowed, the lights above shifting from gold to a flat white. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the color changing from blue to red with every meter. Ash checked her wrist for orientation, but the map flickered. Every time she looked, a new version replaced the last. Ahead, in the shadow of a sconce, Ash saw Jace. He stood with his back to them, helmet on, suit neat and unblemished. His hands were at his sides, relaxed. The air shimmered around him like the heat off a summer road. Elias called out, "Jace," and sprinted forward, closing the distance in a few strides. Jace did not turn. Elias reached him, spun him around by the shoulder. There was nothing inside the helmet, just darkness and the faintest outline of a face, blurred and unfinished. The suit held its shape for a heartbeat, then crumpled to the floor with a soft sigh. The helmet rolled in a circle and stopped, facing Ash. She picked it up, stared through the faceplate. The reflection that stared back was not her own. She set it down, gently. Elias leaned against the wall, head bowed. "It's using him," he said. "Or what's left." Ash nodded. "It wanted us to see." She moved past, eyes on the end of the corridor. The doors there were huge, carved with scenes of banquets and revels. Above, a sign read, "The Promenade, Final Sitting." Ash pressed her hand to the reader. The doors swung open on silent hinges. Inside, the promenade was set for a feast. Tables ran the length of the room, covered with crystal, silver, and plates of impossible food. At every seat a guest, some in perfect black tie, others in old-fashioned cruise uniforms, all frozen in mid-toast or laughter. Their faces were indistinct, features smeared as if by a slow painter. At the head table, 3 seats were empty, goblets ready, the plates spotless. The soundscape here was overwhelming. A babble of conversation, the clink of glass, a string quartet soaring away at something lively. Overhead, the artificial sun shone a warm, yellow light. Elias and Ash walked the length of the hall, neither speaking, each drawn to the head table. At the first empty seat, Elias hesitated, then sat. hands folded in his lap. Ash followed suit. At the third seat, the suit was already there. Salvage gear, helmet on, hands resting on the table. The nameplate read JACE. The PA system came on, the voice now slow and deliberate, with a metallic echo. Welcome, honored guests. The journey can now continue. Enjoy your stay. The guests at the table all raised their glasses, the movement synchronized and stiff. One by one, the figures at the other tables did the same. The sound of toasting filled the room, then died away. A steward glided through the wall behind them, carrying a tray of champagne. He was translucent, features erased, uniform immaculate. He set a glass before each of them, the liquid bubbling and cold. Ash watched as the condensation ran down her glass, pooling on the white cloth. She waited, expecting the room to vanish, for the illusion to break. It did not. Elias lifted his glass, hand steady. To the Orpheus, he said. Ash clinked her glass against his. To the end of the line. Jace, or the thing that wore Jace's suit, lifted its own glass. The helmeted head turned, just slightly, in Ash's direction. The room filled with applause, soft, endless, unceasing. The grand promenade shuddered as the ship made ready to sail again. Outside the windows, stars wheeled and blurred. The Orpheus had new passengers and an eternity to enjoy them. Chapter 4. The applause faded. The banquet dissolved, or perhaps Ash's attention had learned to ignore it. No, that was the wrong scale. She couldn't ignore it, only filter. The guests were always there, their glasses and faces re-rendered anew for every glimpse, like NPCs in a broken game. Every attempt to touch the food or the other guests resulted in only dust and silence. She and Elias sat at the head table for another round. No one insisted on etiquette, but the setting had a gravitational field. When one stood, the pressure in the room grew uncomfortable until both were in motion again. At some unseen signal, the rest of the guests froze, then flickered out. Only the two of them remained, framed by the averted grandeur of the promenade. Elias ran a hand over the tablecloth. It felt wet. Ash was the first to stand. "We're not getting out the same way," she said, but the voice was flat, as if she were reciting from memory. Elias' reply was slower, almost careful. "If the ship loops us, we push deeper." She nodded. He was right, but the words landed with the weight of a last option. Ash found herself staring at the far end of the hall, the doors they'd entered through now sealed with a lattice of black mold, slick and pulsing. She turned instead to the side doors, service access, emergency egress, any vector away from this simulation. The first door was locked. The second, at the back of the promenade, gave way to her palm. The corridor beyond was dark, the carpet deadened to matte grey, all pretense of luxury erased. The air was several degrees colder. Elias trailed, his steps slow as he recalculated their surroundings. He tried his comm, but only received a hiss of static. No skipper, no hullcam feedback, nothing. Ash pulled up her scanner, thumbed it to active, and scanned the walls. The sensor bar flickered, then spat out a lumpy, lopsided grid. Dense matter below, a massive heat signature several decks down, and a squirm of impossible readings around the main vertical axis. "Something's alive under the ballroom," Ash said. She didn't raise her voice, but the words pressed against the hush like a thumbprint on glass. Elias grunted. "Engine room, or whatever's replaced it." They moved. Down the main staff corridor, past storage closets and empty galleys, the walls losing their paint layer by the meter. Soon the only decor was institutional. Hazard stripes, rusted nameplates, and bare bulbs strung at intervals. Ash's suit light cast a trembling oval ahead, the shadows long and liquid. They took the next stairwell down. The steps were steel, scuffed and blackened. Every few meters a red exit sign bled into the darkness, but the arrows always pointed back, never down. Ash ignored them, counting steps as if to anchor herself. 2 decks down, the corridor narrowed. The air was humid now, the cold replaced by a clinging moisture. The floor underfoot was no longer carpet, but a grid of metal, and below it, an oily liquid pooled in the troughs. The smell was copper and iodine, like a bloody nose in a sealed room. Elias stopped at a junction. He ran a gloved finger along the wall and held it up to the scanner light. His glove glistened with a film, the color uncertain in the LED's glare. He wiped it on his jumpsuit. "Organic," he said, and then more quietly, "wet." Ash toggled her scanner. The energy trace was off the scale now, spiking every time the sweep passed the wall. She tapped the wall herself. It gave, very slightly, a slow, almost tidal recall, as if the whole corridor was a muscle flexing under her hand. The wall was warm. She recoiled. Elias caught the look and nodded. "It's alive," he said, and this time his voice was a breath above a whisper. The next stretch of corridor was lit only by their helmet lamps, but the darkness was not complete. Here and there, faint glimmers blinked from the corners, tiny motes of blue or green, like the eyes of deep-sea things. The floor's metal grid gave way to something softer, a mesh that sagged underfoot. Every step sent a ripple down the length of the hallway, and after a few meters, the entire passage seemed to sway in rhythm. They passed doors, each set into the wall at uneven intervals. The first had a label, "Crew Quarters." Elias tried the latch, but the door was fused shut, the edges stitched together by a scar of glossy material. The next door was the same, the growth denser. At one point, the seam between door and frame pulsed in time with Ash's own heartbeat. At a junction, Ash paused, scanner out. She turned in a slow circle, letting the device map the space. The sensor's heat sink ticked with the effort, then shut down. The screen read, "Anomalous field detected. Restart required." She rebooted, watching Elias as she worked. He was at the end of the junction, staring at a break in the wall where the mesh parted, exposing the underlayer. It looked like the inside of a ribcage, arching supports stained with rust, but in places the metal was webbed with something translucent, veined with pink and blue. Elias reached for it. The surface dimpled, then opened, a slow and reluctant mouth. He jerked his hand back, then held it at his side, fingers curled. "I don't like this," he said. Ash rejoined him. "We keep going," she said, and stepped through the mouth. On the other side, the corridor was lined with cables, or what at first glance appeared to be cables. Up close, they twisted and braided in organic patterns, each sheathed in a semi-transparent membrane. Pulses of light ran along them, synchronized in a slow, peristaltic wave. The floor was different here, not mesh, but something that mimicked the texture of cartilage, springy and irregular. Ash's boots made no sound. The air smelled sharp, with a hint of alcohol and lemon. They walked. Ash checked her scanner, which now registered a persistent, background vibration. She set it to record and let it hang from her belt. A noise broke the silence. Distant at first, then closer, a sound like water in pipes, but thicker, more deliberate. Every so often the corridor shuddered, and a gout of the blue-green light flared from the walls. Ash watched it, trying to match the rhythm to anything human. She failed. At a cross corridor, Elias slowed. He pointed with two fingers at a section of wall where the organic sheath had failed, exposing the innards. It was not wire, but something more like a nerve bundle, glossy and pulsating. Black liquid wept from the break, beading on the surface before dripping to the floor. The drops evaporated before they landed. Ash held up her scanner, brought it close. The readout screamed, then went black. The battery had drained from full to zero in a matter of seconds. She snapped the scanner shut and stepped back. "It's feeding," she said. Elias stared at the exposed nerve, then shrugged. "Let's not be next." They hurried, pace increasing as the corridor turned and dropped. The light here changed, too. Less from overhead, more from nodes along the walls, each one a bulge of translucent tissue filled with swirling motes of color. The effect was unsettling, like walking through the gut of a whale. They hit a hatch labeled Aft SYSDMS, the letters almost eaten away. Ash tried the release, but the hatch slid open on its own, the edge coated in a slime that glimmered in the nodal light. The space beyond was a shaft, plunging down at a steep angle. Ladders lined the walls, but some rungs had been replaced by lengths of knotted muscle or cartilage. The bottom was lost in shadow. Elias went first, hands tight on the rails. Ash followed, boots slipping more than once on the yielding surface. As she descended, the temperature climbed, the air growing thick and almost sweet. At the bottom, the shaft let out onto a platform overlooking a broad, low chamber. The space was filled with a thrumming blue glow, every surface sheathed in the same living material. The floor was honeycombed, the holes pulsing in a slow, synchronized rhythm. At the far end, a stair descended into darkness. Elias stepped to the edge of the platform. He turned, waited for Ash. "I think this is the end," he said. Ash nodded, but neither of them moved for a long moment. Above, the shaft sealed itself, the sound like a zipper pulled slow and tight. The only light now was the bioluminescence, the only sound the steady, reassuring, utterly alien beat of the chamber. Ash looked at Elias, who met her gaze, then looked away. The message was clear. Escape had been traded for infiltration. The platform led to a round chamber, the ceiling a collapsed dome of twisted steel beams. A row of what had once been service lockers lined the far wall. Most were torn open, the contents gutted or reduced to pulp. At the center stood a work table, bolted to the floor, its surface mostly covered by a drift of yellowing, half-digested printouts. Set into the wall above it was a data terminal, archaic, bulbous, with a row of battered keys and a cracked monochrome screen. Elias made for the console at once. He wiped the screen with the edge of his glove, then flipped open a maintenance panel beneath. Ash, meanwhile, circled the chamber, flashlight panning across the collapsed lockers and the remains of a pressure suit, its helmet split like a melon. She watched the opening behind them, which pulsed a dim blue every few seconds. Every so often, a shadow would glide across the threshold, a ripple in the living mesh, gone as soon as she focused on it. Elias had the panel off, hands deep in the guts of the terminal. Power supplies shot, but the capacitors full. He sounded almost pleased. "Can you bring it up?" Ash asked, her voice a notch too high. Elias didn't answer right away. The console hummed, then let out a dying beep. He tried again, bridging two wires with a screwdriver. This time the screen blinked to life, casting a sickly green over the table and the printouts. "Got it," he said. "For now." Ash glanced at the screen, then back at the corridor. Nothing moved, but she felt the attention, the sense of being measured. The console spat out a login prompt, the letters wavering as if typed underwater. Elias bypassed it with 3 keystrokes, then started paging through the logs. Each page flickered before resolving. Most of the data was gibberish, strings of corrupted text, fields full of symbols, or entire lines replaced by static. He slowed at a block labeled Voyage Log, Orpheus, year 2122. He read aloud, voice as flat as the screen. Day 171. Ship encountered severe storm event, drifted off scheduled course. Sonar registered anomaly below, unsure if organism or debris. Crew requested analysis. Captain ordered sealed sample. Elias paged forward, scrolling the logs with one finger while the other hand braced the terminal. Day 173. Unusual readings in the ballast tanks. Engineering reports spike in oxygen consumption. Maintenance dispatched to inspect. Ash drifted closer, scanning the table. The printouts were brittle but still legible in places. She read a line, atmospheric controls manually overridden, request denied by main computer. In the margin, a hand had scrawled, not possible, try again. On the wall, a schematic of the Orpheus was pinned by a rusted knife. The lower decks were circled in red, annotated with numbers and short, panic notes. NOISES, C log. Avoid access hall B. If you hear the singing, leave. Elias' finger jabbed the next entry. Day 177. Crew member reports voice in lower decks. Maintenance logs indicate failed return of inspection party. Captain requests full lockdown. He looked up at Ash. The light from the terminal made his face hollow. They lost a team. Ash kept her gaze on the corridor. So did we. Elias paged on. The entries grew more frantic, sometimes breaking mid-line. Day 181. Organic growth detected in ballast tanks spreading rapidly. Deck 5 now sealed, all access to pool area restricted. The next entry was just a string of slashes. Then, day 185. Ship's AI disregarding manual inputs. Hull integrity compromised by expansion of organism. Communications disabled externally, requesting emergency tow. A final entry just above the date stamp. It's learning from us, mimicking what it sees. God help us, I think it's wearing the ship like a skin. The words hung in the air for a moment. Elias let go of the console, hand shaking. It was the whole ship. Ash said nothing. Her attention was locked on the opening behind them. The blue glow had faded, replaced by a rhythm, 3 pulses, then a pause, then 3 again. It matched the thump of her own heart. Elias keyed in another command. The screen flickered, then reset. A face, badly rendered, the features warped and indistinct, filled the display. Its mouth moved, but the only sound was static. The terminal began to overheat, a smell of ozone curling off its shell. Elias tried to kill the power, but the screen wouldn't die. The face stretched, blurred, and filled the display entirely. The chamber lights flickered, then failed. For a full 5 seconds they were blind, only the afterimage of the face burned into their retinas. Then the bioluminescent nodes in the ceiling erupted to full brightness, flooding the chamber with a cold, electric blue. The glow was stronger than before, so intense it painted their shadows on the wall. Elias let go of the terminal and backed up, colliding with the edge of the work table. Ash turned to him. In the harsh light, both looked washed out, nearly transparent. She whispered, "We need to move." They left the logs, the terminal, the memories of the old crew behind. Outside, the corridor beckoned, every inch of it alive and waiting. They took the corridor down, following the strongest signal from Ash's scanner. The air thickened as they descended, not from pressure, but from something denser, every breath slower, as if their lungs strained against invisible syrup. The first landing led to a walkway. It had once been metal grating, but was now an arch of cartilage, springy underfoot, and lined with slick, glassy tissue. The span crossed a chasm that should not have fit inside the ship. The drop below was lost in darkness, except for intermittent flashes from beneath, waves of blue-white light, each illuminating a seething surface far below. Elias paused at the start of the span. He knelt, ran a finger along the arch. It flexed, then snapped back, leaving a trail of clear mucus on his glove. "Catwalk's alive," he said, deadpan. Ash inched forward, boots sticking to the surface. Her scanner vibrated, picking up a background hum like the electrical activity of a storm cloud. Halfway across, a vibration ran the length of the span, making the cartilage undulate. They crouched instinctively, eyes on the far end. For a moment, Ash saw something move across the ceiling above, an outline, large and slow, invisible except where it blotted out the bioluminescent motes. The vibration subsided. Ash rose and made the rest of the crossing at a jog, not looking back. At the far end, the walkway split. One passage ran straight, the other veered left, lined with striations like muscle fibers. She checked the scanner, then pointed left. They took the passage. It narrowed, then widened into a series of chambers, each larger than the last. The walls here pulsed in rhythm, contracting and releasing, the floor squishing with every step. Along the walls, clusters of translucent bulbs oozed a sour yellow light. Every so often, the bulbs would burst, spraying a fine mist that settled instantly. Ash's suit was sticky with it after a minute. She scraped a layer off her visor with her thumb, but the residue smeared, making the world smear and warp around the edges. They passed alcoves, each shaped like a cell in a hive. Some were empty. Others held the remains of what might have been crew or passengers or just more phantoms. The bodies were hollowed, as if the insides had been digested, then reinflated with air. Every face was the same. Mouth open, eyes wide, a rictus of surprise that never faded. Elias stopped at one cell, studying the body inside. It wore the remains of a work suit, badge still pinned to the collar. S. Park engineer. He touched the badge, then withdrew his hand. They didn't just die, he said. They were processed. Ash didn't answer. She watched the next alcove, where the body was not human but something in between. Limbs fused, skin translucent, the bones underneath already replaced by something white and porous. She checked her scanner. The neural activity was stronger here, a constant chatter layered atop the background hum. A noise ahead, a deep, resonant thud, spaced like a heartbeat. They followed it. The passage opened onto a vast chamber, round and high-ceilinged, lined with concentric rings of blue-white light. In the center, a structure that was half machine, half organ, shaped like the ventricles of a heart. Tubes and veins radiated outward, black ichor pumping through them in visible waves. Ash approached, boots dragging in the wetness pooling on the floor. She held up her scanner, but the screen just spun, the data feed overwhelmed by the volume of information. Elias stood beside her, hands open, eyes fixed on the pulsing core. He said, "It's not just mimicking the ship. It is the ship." Ash nodded, though her face was unreadable behind the visor. She circled the heart, flashlight playing over the surface. Embedded in the tissue were scraps of steel and plastic, chunks of hull, bits of terminal, even a few stubs of wiring. It had absorbed everything, then replaced it with itself. Elias circled the opposite way. "We're inside a living machine," he said, "or a machine that decided to be alive." Ash flicked her light at a line of transparent tubes running along the floor. The black fluid inside pulsed at the same rate as the heart above. She traced the line, followed it to a valve set into the wall. It wasn't a valve. It was a mouth, ringed with teeth, spasming as the fluid poured through. Ash's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "It builds on whatever it eats. That's why the upper decks are still there. Why the ballroom, the pool, the fake guests. It's all a lure." Elias looked at the walls, the concentric rings, the logic of the design. "Like an angler fish," he said, mimicking the familiar to draw in prey. Ash's light caught on a patch of wall near the floor. It was etched, not with muscle striations, but with neat, even lines. She crouched, wiped the slime away, and read, "Main engine room, crew only." The text was original, preserved. Everything else had been overwritten. She rose. "It left this for us," she said, like a lure inside the lure. They followed the signal further, taking a passage beneath the heart. The path sloped downward, then leveled. The air was warmer here, close and wet. The walls narrowed until the only way through was a crawl. Ash went first, elbows digging into the soft, warm floor. Elias followed, grunting with the effort. The crawl ended in a metal chamber, cold and dry, the surface rough with corrosion. It was the original engine room, untouched by the organism except where the ceiling had collapsed. The control banks lined the walls, dials and screens dark, but in the center stood a single, upright console. Its display glowed weakly, the last shreds of battery feeding the screen. Ash wiped the dust off, read the data, a schematic of the Orpheus overlaid with red lines. At every docking point, a tendril of the organism reached outward, probing the hull. She scanned the image, then zoomed in on the location of their own ship. A tendril had already breached the docking port. It snaked through the airlock, just a hair's width from the interior. Ash's breath came fast and shallow. "If we go back, we bring it with us." Elias leaned over her shoulder. "It's already started. The only way to stop it is here." Ash nodded, eyes on the schematic. "Cut it off at the core." Elias grinned, lips white. "If there even is a core." They looked at each other, the same idea already in both minds. Ash said, "We can try." Elias said, "Better than being dinner." They left the chamber, the schematic burned into memory, and took the passage back toward the heart. As they walked, the walls seemed to pulse faster, the bioluminescent rings now strobing. The air vibrated with the steady thump of the core. They moved quickly, never speaking, never pausing. The organism felt their presence now. The world around them tightened, every corridor a clenched muscle, every chamber ready to snap shut. But Ash and Elias pushed on, toward the center, the scanner in one hand and a plan in the other. Behind them, the passage began to collapse, the cartilage walkways folding like broken limbs, the chasm below filling with writhing shapes. Ahead, the heart waited, the only route left. The passage narrowed as they neared the heart. The air took on a crackling energy, the walls bleeding blue light through every pore. Ash kept her scanner forward, but the data stream was a static surge, the frequency too dense, the patterns too alien for the firmware to process. At the end, a membrane sealed the passage. Elias didn't hesitate. He drove a boot through the tissue, splitting it in a wet, sucking tear. The opening gaped, then shrank behind them, leaving only a faint, pulsing ring. Inside was the core. The room was vast, a sphere hollowed out of the ship's body, lined with ribs of old steel and new-grown bone. At its center, suspended in a web of black tendrils, hung the brain. It dwarfed them. The surface shimmered with the slow, uneven flicker of synapses, each lobe brightening and fading in waves. The tentacles reached from it, interfacing with every console, every pipe, every exposed circuit. It had grown around the original engineering deck, consumed the navigation stacks and power buses, and used them as skeleton and nerve. Ash and Elias entered at the base, near what had once been the main control cluster. Screens ringed the platform, some original to the ship, others repurposed from the freighter's own tech. They flashed scenes from all over the Orpheus, the deserted ballrooms, the pool, the reading lounge, every corridor and cabin. Each view was overlaid with readouts, heat, energy, even faces and voice prints, as if the ship catalogued its prey. On one screen, the image showed the docking corridor between Orpheus and their salvage ship. The view zoomed in on the airlock seal, where a nest of black filaments probed the threshold, each tip curling and tapping at the metal. Elias ran to the nearest console and keyed it alive. It powered up, but the interface was hijacked. Every command spat out lines of text, then was overridden by a new prompt. The words rolled across the display. "Welcome. We see you. Do you see US?" Ash ignored the screens. She approached the brain, stopping just outside the reach of the largest tentacle. Up close, she saw that its surface was covered in a million tiny mouths, each opening and closing in time with the pulse. She raised her scanner. The device crackled, then melted down, the plastic housing sagging in her hand. She dropped it, watched it sizzle to nothing on the floor. Elias keyed a second console, this one patched to a camera feed of the upper decks. He watched as phantoms flickered in and out, passengers repeating a loop, then vanishing. In the next moment, the same scene played out with different faces, different voices. He turned to Ash, voice hollow. "It's staging the entire ship as theater, for us or for itself." Ash said nothing. She watched the brain pulse, the tentacles quiver and flex. Suddenly the room filled with the sound of a PA system, the speakers everywhere and nowhere. The voice was smooth, genderless, calibrated for reassurance. "Welcome, honored guests. The Orpheus is pleased to offer you permanent residence aboard our luxury accommodations." The words were punctuated by a sigh, like an exhale from the walls. Ash flinched as a tentacle slid closer, the ends splitting into a nest of fine filaments. They danced in the air, tasting her presence. Elias braced himself on the console, breathing hard. "If we go back to the ship, it'll follow us, infect everything we touch." Ash nodded, hands balled to fists. "It wants to escape." The PA voice returned, warmer now, almost loving. "Your stay has been noted. Please relax and enjoy the amenities. Your comfort is our highest priority." Elias laughed, then slammed a fist onto the keyboard. The screens flashed, then reset. Ash stared at the brain, eyes narrowed. "It's adaptive. It watches, it learns, it copies. Everything it sees, it builds into itself." Elias watched the docking corridor feed, the filaments inching closer to the freighter. "We can't let it get off the Orpheus." Ash took in the room. Tentacles, screens, the slow, tidal movement of the brain. She whispered, "We have to kill it, here." Elias nodded, but his eyes were still on the feed, the thin membrane between their world and this one shrinking by the second. The brain in the center brightened, every lobe alight, the tentacles undulating in a slow, hypnotic wave. The PA voice spoke again, louder this time. "We are so glad you joined us. Please stay with us. There is no departure." The tentacles reached for them, slowly at first, then accelerating, eager to close the distance. Ash and Elias fell back, searching the consoles, the walls, the tangled mess of wires and muscle for anything that could be used as a weapon, a switch, a kill command. The room shrank around them, every exit closing, the air filling with the hum of the entity's attention. Ash said, "There's always a failsafe. There has to be." Elias gripped a length of metal pipe, ready to swing it, even as the massed filaments reached for his face. The last thing they heard before the tentacles wrapped around them was the PA's final, soothing whisper. "Thank you for choosing Orpheus. We promise you will never leave." Chapter V. A sound like the world's largest chest cracking open carried down the corridor as Ash and Elias tore themselves loose from the knot of neural filaments. It took 3 tries, Elias bracing both feet on the lacquered wall, Ash using her helmet as a wedge to shear off the most persistent tendrils. Their gloves came away coated in a grey, mucilaginous substance that smoked slightly in contact with the recycled suit fabric. The first seconds afterward were an almost total silence, a post-blast hush that made the memory of the PA's final promise echo even sharper. "We promise you will never leave." Moved. Ash led, since her helmet light was still working and her scanner ran off a redundant cell. Elias limped at first, then found a rhythm. The doors on this deck were dead, open only where the ship had dissolved the hinges or replaced them with a sphincter of pale tissue. They kept to the wall and avoided the worst of the ooze. At the first junction, they cut down a stairwell, the overhead bulbs now burned out, and the only illumination the cyan bioluminescence blooming between floor tiles. Each step was like descending through the nervous system of a dying god. Every surface throbbed, flexed, recoiled at the touch. They hit the main utility spine after a dozen flights. The corridor here was different from before, wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast, lined with redundant rails and always sloping slightly down. The handholds were all slick. The original fixtures, brass, steel, the careful touches of a human designer, had been half digested by bands of white cartilage and cellophane membranes so that the wall looked like it was developing bones beneath the paint. Somewhere down the passage, something whined in a high register, then fell silent. Ash counted her breaths, matched the rhythm to her steps. The passage forked. The left-hand branch ended in a visible barrier, a wadded mass of cilia that trembled at their approach and parted just enough to let them through. Beyond, a ladder all the way down. The rungs were corroded, pitted with salt and sweat, but they held. Elias went first this time, his boots clanging on every bar. Ash followed, counting time. A third of the way down, the PA system came back to life. This time it sounded just behind the skin of the wall. "Travelers," it said, the voice all honey and no edge. "We see your journey is difficult. Why not rest? We have prepared comfortable accommodations for you." Ash ignored it. She checked the scanner, which started to vibrate in her hand as it tracked a denser and denser signal below them. The walls close to the ladder were nearly transparent. Behind them, veins of black fluid pulsed in a slow, peristaltic tide. At the bottom, the passage opened into the service level, an entire deck of raw pipes and cables, the air hot and heavy, condensation pooling on every overhead. Here, the ship's anatomy had begun to override the original layout. Instead of straight runs, the corridors looped and doubled back. The floor had grown a new layer, a living mesh, sticky underfoot. Elias wiped sweat from his face, then caught himself and checked his glove. "You get anything?" he asked. Ash nodded, held up the scanner. "First node should be under the next corridor. Feels like a power tap, maybe a main junction." They advanced, tracking the scanner's signal. The corridor narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. Ash heard the PA's breath between every footfall, the little static click that came before a new message, the even softer hush as it faded out. In the next chamber, the temperature spiked. Pipes overhead steamed. Some had split open, venting hot water or a pinkish mist that strung the sinuses. The fusion point, when they found it, was unmistakable. Where there should have been a simple transformer box, now a mass of tendrils wound outward from a globular core. The core itself was semi-translucent, shot through with running lights. Inside, a churn of black fluid and brighter flecks, like plankton under microscope. The tendrils ran up into the ceiling, down into the deck plates, and along the wall into every visible system. Elias whistled, low and tight. "That's the brain stem," he said. Ash said nothing. She set the scanner to record and advanced on the thing, letting her helmet light pick out the way the core pulsed in time with the throb of the distant engine. She circled once, checked for obvious hazards. No defensive behavior, no spines or sprayers. The only response was an increase in the regular pulse, as if the creature was bracing. Elias dropped his pack and started prepping the charges. Each came out wrapped in a foil packet, self-adhesive and soft as a bandage. He slapped the first one to the base of the core, then the next at the top junction where the main tendrils ran. Ash watched the scanner, tracking the energy pattern as it rose. On the last charge, Elias hesitated, then pressed it hard to the central node, making sure the sticky side made full contact with the skin. The PA chimed. This time the voice was sweeter, almost plaintive. "There is no need for violence," it said. "We are not your enemy. This place can be yours if you accept it." Ash held her thumb to the scanner's transmit button, recording the message for later. Elias backed away, arms raised, motioning her to take cover. They ducked around the next corner, pressed themselves to the wall. Elias triggered the charges by remote, and for a second, nothing happened. Then the entire corridor shook. Not the clang of an explosion, but the flex and shudder of a body being punched in the spine. Ash felt the air compress, then decompress. The light in the passage, her helmet lamp and the native bioluminescence flickered out. In the darkness, the core made a sound. Not an alarm, but a wet, tearing howl that ran up and down the register, echoing through the ship. Every pipe and wire vibrated. For several seconds, the only thing they could hear was the noise of the ship's agony. The PA system went silent. Then, after a count of 3, it came back on, softer than before. "That was unfortunate," it said. "But we can still be friends. Please join us. The Lido deck is hosting a celebration in your honor." Ash exhaled, shook her hands to clear the tremor. She checked the scanner. The fusion point was dead, the energy reading zeroed out. Elias checked his own band, then flashed a thumbs up. They moved. Every corridor now felt tighter, as if the ship's muscles were tensing in anticipation. The detonation had changed the local gravity. Floors sloped unexpectedly, doors warped in their frames. The next ladder down was blocked by a mass of what looked like scar tissue, but Ash and Elias cut through it with a crowbar and brute force. Each new passage was darker, wetter, the air now thick with the tang of ammonia and salt. The PA kept talking, each message more urgent, more needful. "We understand loneliness. You have traveled so far just to be alone, but we can offer connection, togetherness. Why destroy what you could become?" Ash ignored it. They pressed forward, tracking the scanner's readings. The next target would be deeper, closer to the lowest deck. Ash caught herself staring at the walls, watching for changes. At one point, she thought she saw a human face in the membrane, a blurred outline, mouth open, eyes fused shut. She looked away and said nothing. Down another flight, the hull changed again, now more organic than machine. The pipes ran in vascular patterns, the mesh on the floor grown thicker, almost spongy. The walls leaked a thin, luminous liquid that dripped and pooled in the corners. In one stretch, the drops hung in the air, perfectly round, like eyes watching them. They reached another fusion point. This one was smaller, less organized, a side node. Elias didn't waste time with the full suite of charges. He stabbed the packet with a knife, jammed it deep into the mass, then pulled Ash back as it detonated. The result was less dramatic, but effective. The node shriveled, the tendrils recoiled, and the lights along the corridor died in a ripple. The PA's next message was clipped, barely masking the irritation. "This is unnecessary. We only wish to serve you. Your comfort is our purpose." Ash checked her suit's internal sensors. Oxygen was down 3%, temperature up a degree. The ship was rerouting resources, trying to freeze or roast them out. She rechecked the scanner, mapped the remaining nodes, and pointed Elias toward the final target. As they moved, the corridor contracted behind them, sealing off escape. At one point, the wall closed so quickly that Elias had to throw his shoulder into it, bashing the soft tissue aside before it could knit closed. Ash swore under her breath, then pulled him through. They hit a shaft lined with what might have once been insulation, now replaced with a mat of white, hair-like filaments. The rungs here were bone, not metal, grown into the wall at perfect intervals. Elias tested the first one, then climbed. Ash followed, each step making the wall around them twitch. They reached the end, a junction box the size of a coffin, embedded in a tumor of yellow and black. This was the central node, the last stop before the main engine room. Ash wiped her visor, checked the scanner. The signal was huge, almost off-scale. Elias hesitated, then pulled both remaining charges, set them in tandem. The PA's voice came back, now edged with true panic. "Please do not do this. There is still time to accept our offer. The journey is better together. We are better together." Ash keyed her mic to record. "We refuse," she said, voice flat. Elias jammed the charges home, then ran. They didn't take cover, just turned the corner and braced. The explosion was immediate. The node ruptured, spraying a jet of blue fluid into the corridor. The lights above them flashed, then all at once the entire deck tilted, pitching them into the far wall. Ash caught herself on the mesh, felt the snap of something organic give under her hands. Elias tumbled, hit the deck, then rolled to his feet. A siren sounded, a real one this time, hoarse and ugly like a ship about to founder. The PA voice cut in, desperate. "Please return to the Lido deck. Your party awaits. Please, please." The last word cut off as the system failed. Ash checked the scanner. Every node in range was dead. The only remaining signal was from below, the engine room, the core of the ship. Elias grinned, teeth bright in the glow of helmet light. "Almost there," he said. They moved, picking up speed. The corridor now shook underfoot, the air strobing with the dying pulse of the ship's nervous system. Every step was a fight. The walls flexed, the path folded in on itself, but Ash and Elias kept moving. In one stretch, the deck collapsed beneath them, but they dropped and caught themselves on a pipe, then swung down to the next level. The blue liquid that flooded the passage pooled ankle-deep, hot and viscous. At the final ladder, the wall had grown teeth, small, sharp projections that nipped at their gloves as they climbed. Ash ignored the sting, hauled herself up, then helped Elias through. At the top, the passage opened to the main engine space. It was enormous. The ceiling lost in shadow, the original machinery half consumed by new tissue. The engine itself was unrecognizable, a churn of metal and flesh, pistons replaced by sinew, turbines lined with fine cilia that beat in perfect time. At the center, the heart. Not metaphorical, not metaphor at all. A sphere of pale muscle, as large as a man, floating in a cage of bone and wire. Every beat sent a tremor through the ship, every pulse matched by a glow of bioluminescence that ran along the ceiling. Elias started prepping the last charge, but Ash caught his hand. "Wait," she said. "Let me try something." She stepped up to the heart, watched the surface flex and writhe. She raised her gloved hand and set it against the muscle. The ship stilled. The PA came on, voice barely more than a whisper. "We can offer anything you want," it said. Ash leaned in, voice low. "I want you to let us go." A pause, then quietly. "We cannot. We are alone. Without you, we are alone again." Ash watched the heart, the way it shivered at her words. She felt a pang, real, brief, but gone in the next breath. She turned to Elias. "Blow it," she said. He did. The charge vaporized the cage, ruptured the heart in a spray of fluid and light. The walls screamed, a pure, unbroken sound that cut through every other noise. The engine room went dark. Then a moment later, the emergency lights kicked in. The tissue that had lined the walls started to curl and flake away like sunburned skin. The PA made one last attempt. Please, please. But the voice collapsed, replaced by a gurgle, and then, finally, silence. Ash and Elias stood there, breathing hard, letting the silence settle. Then Ash smiled, brief and sharp. Ready, she said. Elias nodded. They moved through the dying corridors toward whatever exit waited above. The corridor above the engine room was no longer a corridor at all. The detonation had reduced the precision of the Orpheus's structure to a suggestion. Everything wavered, as if viewed through heat haze, and wherever Ash and Elias set foot, the floor retracted just long enough to keep them off balance. The ship's old skeleton tried to reassert itself. A buckled steel girder poked through the flesh like an exposed bone, but it too was quickly lacquered over with a layer of wet tissue. Every new surface in their path had the gloss and color of raw tongue. They kept moving, because movement was better than thought. They passed what had once been a recreation suite, now stripped to a pulpy red box. Elias peered inside, eyes darting to the dark mass that hung from the ceiling like a cluster of stillborn fruit. Ash said nothing, just tightened her grip on the crowbar she'd carried up from below. They found the next ladder shaft. The rungs were gone, replaced with a spiral of cartilage and tendon. The climb was easier than before, the ladder flexing under Ash's weight, as if the ship wanted to assist. Elias followed, hands slicked with blood where the tissue had burst under his grip. The air was thicker here, less oxygen and more something else, maybe the exhalation of whatever hybrid creature now wore the ship's hull. The PA system woke again, the voice softer than before, barely a whisper. Travelers, please, you have destroyed so much. Why continue? Rest is better, rest is best. Elias spat onto the floor. No, he said, not until we finish it. Ash checked the scanner. The signal was strong, and the battery was half dead, but she could see the next node. Somewhere above, in the axis of the ship's original navigation core. She keyed a ping to the suit comms, marking the spot. The next deck was a slaughterhouse. The walls pulsed and flexed, and where the old doors had been, now only openings stretched in and out of shape with every breath. Elias ducked the first, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and pointed ahead. There. The passage was lined with clusters of glassy bulbs, each filled with fluid, sometimes clear, sometimes clouded by something darker. Ash didn't linger. She led, eyes on the scanner, body crouched for the next lunge. A sound, from behind, then ahead, then all around. Footsteps, but wrong, too light, too many, too close together. They kept moving. The bulbs burst above them, one at a time, spraying the air with mist that strung the eyes and left a sweet, metallic taste in the mouth. They reached an intersection. The scanner showed 3 branches, all leading toward the navigation core, but the leftmost pulsed with the strongest energy reading. Ash headed that way, Elias behind her. The walls closed in, the floor now rippling with each step like the back of a sleeping animal. The sound in the air shifted, now not footsteps, but laughter, then a voice. It was Jace. Hey, Ash, it said, lazy and easy, the way Jace used to be after 3 drinks and no filter. You don't have to run. You can stay here. We can be together. Ash stopped, just for a second. Keep moving, Elias said, voice sharp. The voice followed them, now from the ceiling, now from behind a fold in the wall. I know what you're doing, it said. I know you're scared, but it's better here, you'll see. Ash didn't reply, but she felt her chest get tighter. On her glove, the salt crust from Jace's death in the pool still glittered, the crystals biting into the soft material. She dug her fingers into her palm, enough to focus, enough to keep moving. The final access point was a hatch set in the wall, ringed with black, cilia-like projections that twitched and reached for their boots as they passed. Elias wrenched the hatch open with the crowbar, then kicked at the cilia until they recoiled. Inside, the air was arctic. The temperature dropped so sharp Ash's suit readout flashed a warning. They dropped into the nav core. It was as if a giant's fist had crushed the room, then let go. Everything was shattered. The panels and screens crumpled, the old captain's chair reduced to paste. At the center, growing around the wreckage, was the last of the organism's fusion nodes. It was larger than the first, nearly as wide as the room, a grotesque egg of tissue shot through with hundreds of branching veins. Every few seconds, the entire structure spasmed, sending a shiver down the walls. Elias set the last two charges, hands slick with the juice that poured from the cilia. Ash watched the scanner. The signal was unstable but climbing. The node throbbed as Elias armed the timer, and the room filled with a noise. Not a scream, but something lower, closer to the sound of muscle tearing. The voice returned. Jace's voice, but now joined by hundreds of others, an impossible chorus. Ash, Elias, please, don't. She ignored it. Elias ignored it, too. They backed out of the nav core, up the hatch, and ran. The walls closed behind them, but not fast enough. The charges went off. For a second, all was light. Blue, then white, then black. Ash hit the floor, rolled, heard Elias' boots thud next to her. The deck shook so hard her teeth rattled. When the air cleared, the PA voice was gone. All that remained was the sound of the Orpheus's real bones. Metal groaning, steam hissing, the familiar pop and creak of hull under stress. Ash checked the scanner. Nothing dead, the display empty. Elias lay on the floor, breathing hard, then let out a cackle that echoed up the corridor. Is it dead? He asked, voice hoarse. Ash shrugged. If it isn't, it's bleeding out. They crawled up the next ladder, finding the way easier. The walls had lost their tension. The organic mesh receded, and in some places the original paint and fixtures showed through. The bulbs in the ceiling no longer pulsed. As they walked, the laughter faded, replaced by a distant hush, the sound of something that had lost the will to sing. They passed through the remains of the ballroom. No guests, no music. The floor was cracked tile, the tables overturned, the grand chandelier a heap of glass and wire. Ash glanced at Elias, who offered a crooked smile. Almost there, he said. They kept moving. Behind them, the Orpheus slumped, its illusions gone, its halls no longer looping in impossible geometry. The only ghosts now were the memory of what it had been, and the certainty that whatever they'd fought, whatever they'd killed, had never been meant for this world. At the far end, the original airlock waited. The way home, maybe. Ash touched the salt on her glove, then opened the last door. The airlock was as they'd left it, more or less. The original controls blinked amber, the pad slick with what might have once been blood but now had dried and flaked to salt. The lock itself was warped but passable. Ash cycled the outer door, then the inner, and for the first time in what felt like years, actual space, black, clean and sterile, waited beyond. She and Elias moved through the breach, boots loud on the metal plating. They stepped out into the connecting umbilical, the docking tether that had once seemed fragile and now felt like the safest place in the universe. Through the transparent spine, they could see the Orpheus's hull flexing, then buckling inward, as if the pressure of reality itself was too much for it now. Inside the umbilical, the temperature dropped to what it should have been. A chill that bit through the suit, but at least it was predictable. They made the crossing in silence, passing midway above the black pool, or what remained of it. It was empty, not just drained, but caved in, the tiles cracked and collapsed inward like a mouth refusing to speak. Around the rim, the deck was pitted and scarred, every trace of perfection erased by the violence below. On the far side, the airlock to their freighter blinked. The entry hatch was still there, still sealed and waiting. Ash and Elias ran the cycle, hands shaking. The door opened with a hiss that sounded like applause. Inside, normal gravity, stale air, and the rumble of the emergency generator. Elias let out a noise that was almost a sob, then slammed the lock shut and started the undocking sequence. Ash stood just inside, back pressed to the wall, letting herself take in the familiar stink of home. Rust, old coffee, burnt plastic. "Get us clear," she said, voice rasped raw. Elias keyed the main thrusters. The freighter shuddered, then slid free of the Orpheus, pulling away on inertia and hate. Out the window, the liner's hull shivered, then peeled away in long strips, like bark from a diseased tree. Debris spun into the dark, then vanished. The Orpheus itself bent, then folded, then collapsed in on itself, leaving behind a glitter of unconnected light. Ash watched until it was out of sight. She slumped down, hands loose at her sides. In her left palm, she still carried a trace of Jace's salt, just a single flake, caught in the crease where glove met skin. Elias at the controls ran through the checklist. Oxygen levels, reactor health, navigation. He went through it like a litany, fingers never stopping. "Anything?" Ash asked, not looking up. He shook his head, still watching the board. "Nothing in the hold, no hitchhikers." He paused, then added, "No passengers." Ash let out a laugh, then wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. A minute passed, then another. On the third, the comm system chirped. Ash looked at Elias, then at the board. He keyed it open. A signal, faint, then stronger. Not a distress call, not an automated beacon, but something else. A pulse, encoded, but unmistakably deliberate. Elias worked the translation routine. The message resolved on the screen. "This is USN SEABOUND. Request assistance. Hull breach. Life support failing. All hands in danger." Ash read it 3 times before speaking. "That's an American sub," she said. "That's an Earthship, the wrong century." Elias nodded, his face colorless in the monitor's glow. Ash checked the scanner, then the external cams. Far out, beyond the debris field, another vessel waited. Not a cruise liner, not a salvage rig. A sub, black and perfect, floating where no sub should ever be. The comms chirped again, more insistent. Elias looked at her, his eyes enormous. Ash closed her hand around the salt flake. It bit into her skin, cold and sharp. She reached for the comm, keyed it to transmit, then hesitated. "Do we answer?" Elias asked. Ash stared at the screen, at the impossible signal, then at the black beyond. In the dark, the salt glistened, just a little. Ash keyed the mic. "Copy, Seabound. This is Tethys Reclaimer. We have you on scan." The reply came instantly, a voice warped by years, but unmistakably human. "Thank God, we thought we were alone." Ash smiled, lips white as the salt on her palm. She looked out the window, into the nothing, and waited for the next story to begin.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.